The morning came with a bruised light over the Blackwater, the river's skin dull and oily like beaten tin, the gulls following it upstream the way beggars follow the smell of bread. The Red Keep woke slowly to it. Kitchen fires coughed small, damp smoke. Scullions pushed open shutters that stuck on swollen frames. The castle cats stepped down to the stone with the soft certainty of animals that had always owned this place. Ash on the wind, damp wool, the sharp kiss of brine. King's Landing breathed it all. Down in the fish market, the first fishwives were already shouting at no one, at everyone, at the indifferent tide. Farther inland, the black and gold cloaks of the city watch took shape out of the air, shuffling from their beds, scratching at lice, tightening belts that had been loosened for cheap wine and cheaper company. A red-haired girl with a bucket on her hip laughed when a guard made a jest. Somewhere, a dog barked like a thrown knife. In the Tower of the Hand, Eddard Stark lay awake long before the light stirred, the way men do who have learned to be suspicious of dawn. He listened to the city as if it were a living thing with a changeable mood, like a horse with new tack, trying to learn how to read its ears. When he finally rose, he did it with a careful economy, as if each motion cost something he minded to spend. He put the maester's salve on his leg where an old hurt ached in wet weather, and it was wet weather often in King's Landing even when it did not rain. The salve smelled faintly of crushed mint and earth, a friendly smell that reminded him of Winterfell's herb garden and a woman's sure hands, though his wife's fingers were not the ones that had spread paste on him in years of campaigning. He flexed the knee until it would bear him, took the first few limping steps until the limp ironed out to a straight line, and let the day find him. There were papers on the table already, as if they had crept there in the night, ledgers, tallies, notes in the prickly hand of his steward. Beside them stood a flagon of watered wine with a lemon slice floating sad and translucent at the top. He took a small mouthful to wet his throat and tasted metal from the cup. He thought of choosing another, then let it pass. The habit of making do was one of the few northern virtues that traveled well. A breeze came, brought with it the murmur and stink of the great city's waking, and moved the ledgers as if to turn the pages. He reached to still them and his fingers fell on the figures again, columns of numbers like ranks of men. There were no victories in these ranks, only absences. Debt had its own kind of stench. Eddard had come to know it since he'd taken the hand's chain. The crown owed to Lannister gold in sums that could feed the North for winters, to the Faith, to the Moneylenders' Guild, to half a dozen lesser lords. The master of coin made neat marginal notes in a small, precise hand, each loop and flourish an apology that smiled. He had stacked explanation on explanation until they looked like a child's tower of painted blocks, tottering and pretty. A familiar tread came to the door. "If you go on staring at those, my lord," said Jory Castle, "they'll blink. Do you keep them here at night and tell them stories?" Ned asked without looking up. "They multiply while I sleep. That's because coin breeds best where there's heat," Jory said. He came in, glanced at the papers with a distaste a soldier has for any battle he cannot meet with iron, and touched the hilt at his hip as if to assure himself the honest work still existed. Ned set his thumb on a number and pressed until it left a pale moon. "The king wishes a hunt at week's end." "So it said," Jory replied. "We have men to find the boar and drive it, if you will, my lord. Half the city would turn out for the killing." "The king is not a half." Ned let his hand fall, weighing again the duty of friendship and the obligation of counsel. He had told Robert to restrain the spending. Robert had laughed as if Ned had told him to stop breathing. Laughter was what kings had in place of argument. A warmth like sorrow rose in Ned, a complicated thing. Robert had been a young man who could lift a warhammer as if it were a walking stick. The weapon had since grown heavier, so had the man. "We'll meet the small council at second bell," Ned said. "See that we are not late. It encourages them." Jory left with that as men leave a tent before dawn, grateful and resigned. Ned drew the ledger closer. He tried to read once more the gracious looping script that spoke of necessary entertainments and seasonal gifts to the watch and advances upon our coming harvests. In the margins, a note as tidy as a clipped fingernail. certain expectations from Casterly Rock. Leave to me. The curl at the end of the me was a flourish that knew its own cleverness. He closed the book and reached for the wolf's head clasp of his cloak. The iron snout was cold, and the teeth were sharp enough to prick, as if mocking the softness of silk. He made himself think of snowfall that came soundless and set the world right under white. The corridors of the keep held night in their corners even when daylight came. Servants knew to bow and let the hand pass. A boy with a pot ran and slopped stew on his own bare feet and danced without a sound. A septa moved as if she wheeled on hidden casters, the habit swish marking her progress. Lord Renly's men went by laughing, their green mantles catching the light like leaves. Beyond them, a gold flash of hair and a tilt of a neck that marked a Lannister woman he did not know. Sandor Clegane stood before a sun-bright window with his mouth turned down, his scar deep in shadow, and did not turn his head. The small council chamber always felt like a place built for listening rather than speaking. The walls remembered things. The carved chairs made men sit too upright. The sunlight found its way in but lost its nerve upon the table where a map of the city lay under glass, marked with pins like a seamstress's cloth. Ned took his seat and wrapped his hand around the arm carved in the shape of a lion's paw. It did not fit him. Across from him, the round face and soft eyes of Varys, the damp pink mouth that never quite closed when it was in repose. To Varys's left, Grand Maester Pycelle with his drooping whiskers and the smell of peppercorn and old vellum about him. Renly arrived in a cloud of something floral that left a trail like a girl's laugh. And last, with an unassuming step that made the room shift around him, Peter Baelish. "My Lord Hand," Littlefinger said, "I have brought you proof the gods have mercy upon us." "If the gods can be tallied, show me the column they favor," Ned replied. "The proof is that we manage at all, in which case, their mercy is abundant." Peter smiled with two layers, a pleasant outer one and another just behind it that knew the cost of the pleasantry. He slid a small folder of parchment toward Ned the way a conjurer slides a card toward a mark. "A revised accounting of the expenses for the tourney, with certain offsets you will find amusing." Ned did not reach for it. "The king proposes another hunt." "Proposes," Renly murmured, for a word that allows the illusion of negotiation. Varys fluttered his fingers like moths. "His grace hunts as a man prays, with emptiness if he does not go. It is unwise to deny such sacraments." "The boar will be cheaper than the tourney," Peter observed, "and more honest. Hogs are less expensive than poets." "We have no money," Ned said. He let the words sit on the table. He waited. They looked at him as if at a thing they had each handled in private and were now embarrassed to see in public. "We have patrons," Peter corrected softly. "It is a more modern term." "The term is debt," Ned said. "I know it well enough. A debt is a leash you hand to your enemy. Enemies can be taught to heal with a bone at the right moment," Peter said. "Your pardon, Lord Stark, if I make the matter sound like kennel work. I am sure in the north you only ever barter with the honor of men. In the city we must barter with the appetite of institutions, which are more constant in their hungers." "Constant as winter," Renly said, "and as inevitable." Pycelle, clearing his throat like a draft horse, put his hands on the table as if the wood steadied him. "The faith's indulgence has ever been to the realm's blessing. It must not be strained, my lords. If we are to seek further considerations of leniency, perhaps the hand might draft." Ned raised his eyes and Pycelle's words fell like a dropped chain. "If we plunder the faith for the king's wine, we will teach the small folk what piety means." Varys's mouth turned in compassion at no one in particular. "Most small folk have learned by now that piety means doing what hunger asks, and then telling themselves a story about it afterward. It is the stories that cost us nothing. The coin is another matter." Peter watched Ned with an expression of fond patience, as if Ned were a boy asking to postpone a tax that had already been spent. "My Lord Hand, the wolf in you mistrusts the cat's cradle," he said mildly. "It is natural, but it is the cradle we have, and the city will not sleep without it. We are afloat on a tide of promissory notes, it is true, yet we are afloat." We might even drift into a harbor. Shall we take down the sails in fear of wind? You'd have us rig a bigger sail, Ned said, and chain it to Casterly Rock. Rock is steady, Peter said. If it's steadiness you want. The door opened then without a knock, and a gust of life crossed the room. Robert Baratheon came in with his son about him, though the sky was weak that morning, a presence that made the lanterns seem redundant. He carried himself as a man carries himself who has forgotten how not to, and his brown beard was a shade too long for the face that wore it. His belly moved before him by a comfortable fraction. Lancel Lannister came a half-step behind with eyes lowered, a dutiful ribbon, the wine boy whose wrists had known more gold than sweat. The king was laughing when he crossed the threshold, a laugh that threw itself into the room before he could be halfway inside. And then he saw who was there and whom he might want to impress, and his laughter turned to a grin without losing its volume. "My lords," he said, "we spend this morning like a miser, counting what we don't have." His voice was warm as a hearth and rough as a boar's hide. He clapped Ned on the shoulder as a man claps a brother who has not yet disappointed him today. "Stark, you look like you've swallowed a nail." "I have swallowed numbers," Ned said. "That is worse." Robert's gaze went around the table, slowed only briefly at Varys, who bowed just enough, skipped over Pycelle as if he were furniture, came to rest on Peter. "You," he said, "little man with the large numbers, tell me a thing to make me feel clever." "The hunt will hearten the city, your grace," Peter said, and fashioned his smile to suit the use. "After a spectacle such as the tourney, it is wise to let the small folk see their king at ordinary sport. It makes you near at hand and husbandly." "Husbandly?" Robert repeated the word as if it tasted like a joke, and he was amused by whoever had put it in his mouth. "Is that how you say it in your ledgers?" "In a good year," Peter said. Ned watched the exchange with the mild aversion he had for practiced banter. The words felt like the clashing of swords made of tin. Robert liked men who made him feel intoxicated in his best judgments, men who could make extravagance sound like duty. It was why he liked Renly, and why he had once liked Jon Arryn, who had known how to pour water on his head without offending him. Peter poured oil. Oil made things slide where they ought to grip. "We've no coin," Ned said, and the king glanced at him as a man glances at rain when he is in a good mood and does not intend to admit it will make the road worse. "We'll find it," Robert said. "You are the hand." Pycelle rumbled again, and Varys shaped his hands as if to contain a delicate bubble and set it on the table. "His Grace's people need cheer," Varys murmured. "We have had rumors of plague in the river districts. The surest way to quiet such rumors is to make public ceremony of vigor. A king with a boar at his feet is a cure for many fevers." "And raises one or two," Renly murmured, and Peter's eyes slid to him in approval for the neatness of the jest. Ned preferred the clean bleakness of hard statements. "We cannot borrow more from the Lannisters." Silence lived for a breath. Then Robert laughed as if Ned had said something entertaining in a language he did not speak, and turned to Lancel. "Wine." The boy came up quick, nerves taut in his hands. He poured as if the acts of tipping and stopping had been lessons he learned at sword point. Robert's eyes leveled at Peter over the rim of the cup. "You've kept us out of the shit in sums," he said. "What do you say now?" "I say the shit is deep," Peter said. "But we can teach it manners." There was a day for that tone, light and audacious, and there were days when the king's pride had been gnawed thin. Ned knew it the way a hunter knows the thickness of ice by the way the measure stick sounds against it. He saw the change in Robert before the words came. The humor never left Robert's face. It simply hardened behind his eyes and made his smile a weight. "When we were boys," Robert said slowly, "you were a sliver of a thing who thought to tilt at Brandon Stark. I told you then to be careful where you put your little blade." Peter's smile widened by half the width of a hair. "His blade was the careful one," he said. "It knew to stop where it would be remembered." Ned felt his fingers close, the way they close on a hilt though there is none under them. The room shifted its breath. Even Renly looked down. Robert took a swallow that left the cup lighter by a third and shaped his mouth more carefully around the next thing. You talk of remembrance. I remember debts. I remember who tells me we can take one more ladle from the pot without scraping the bottom. He set the cup down hard enough to make the lemon slice jump. I remember who told me the tourney would pay for itself in laughter and fines. What I see now is that I have been paying for laughter all my life, and the jokes don't taste good anymore. Your Grace, Varys said gently. Coin obeys a peculiar arithmetic. It multiplies in the dark. The master of coin has multiplied in the dark? Robert's laugh turned sharp. You are all so clever. Perhaps that is the trouble. His hand came down to the table one more time with the flat sound of meat, and he leaned forward. We talk like tailors measuring a fat man for his shroud. I am tired of talk. Peter Baelish, you are relieved of your office. Guards. The last word fell into the room like a thrown hammer. It landed where it wished. The door opened and Ser Barristan Selmy stood there as if the word had summoned him from the stone. Behind him, 2 white cloaks moved like ghosts. Peter did not turn his head. Relieved, he said, as if tasting the shape of a long-distant joke. His hand made no move for the folder. His eyes slid instead to Ned, a glance that had in it both a small farewell and a question of how far the hand's hand could reach. Ned's throat tightened, but he kept it meek. Your Grace, he said to Robert. Dismissal is your prerogative, but Baelish has served the realm, however we quarrel with his sums. To take him under guard is not necessary for. I did not say under guard, Robert said, and his voice had gone soft, which was when it was most dangerous. I said guards, so the man doesn't try to slip away with the carefulness he is famous for. I've had enough of careful men who make me poor. His eyes turned to Peter again. If I let you live, you'd be finding me loans at my own funeral. Peter's mouth moved as if to shape delicacy and found there was no place for it. Your Grace, he said, and there was a bare inch of unmet apology in it that might have done him some good in a different room, a different day, a different king. But Robert had made a shape with the morning and he meant to keep it. Take him, he said, put him in a cell. We'll have the thing properly. I'll not have him crawling to fat cats without my leave. Ser Barristan, see it done. It was quick and was not. Barristan moved with an old man's care that still had a young man's certainty of consequence. The 2 other whites stepped to Peter's shoulders, and Peter rose with them as if the motion were his idea. His chair made a sound like a small complaint against stone. Peter did not resist. He could no more resist gracefully than a cat can protest a bath with dignity. He took up the folder because it was what his hands did, and Barristan gently took it from him. Their fingers touched and fell away. Your Grace, Varys tried once more, because it was his part to try. If we must, Robert said. He looked at Ned as if expecting either a blessing or a break and would hear neither. Is there no bread in this room? He said suddenly, as if hunger had made him merciful for a moment and he needed to busy himself with something it could solve. Damn it, I want to hunt. The door closed on Peter and the white cloaks. For a time the room was filled with the sound of no one speaking. Then Renly, who had never had a grief last longer than a song, exhaled and smiled slightly at nothing, as if impressed by the weight of the air. Pycelle cleared his throat in a small, scandalized rattle. Ned looked at the place where Peter had sat and saw a thin shadow left by his presence, the mark a lizard leaves where it warms on a wall. He is to be tried? Ned said. Tried, Robert said. For treachery to coin, which is treachery to me. I will have a reckoning. How much of what he did kept us from drowning, and how much of it had his hand in my purse. I will see proof that he is clean, or I will see his head on a spike. He took another drink and found the cup empty. He threw it to Lancel. Fill it, he said, and added almost idly. The realm is not a whore to be pimped and cajoled for pennies, or if it is, I will be the one to do it. This will make ripples, Varys said. His eyes, unreadable as birds' eggs, turned only partly toward the king as if the rest of him had business with the silence. Lord Baelish is a spider in a web we do not wholly know. To pluck at the body is to set the strands shivering. "I've never had patience for spider work," Robert said. "If there is a web, burn it. Smoke from such burning suffocates the unoffending," Varys murmured. "The unoffending do not climb around in webs," Robert replied, and his smile came again, more indulgent now that he had made a choice. He clapped Ned once more, this time without looking at him. "Stark, we'll hunt at week's end. You can come or you can stay and count." It was not a request. Ned inclined his head because there were times when to nod was the only sword a man could raise against a friend. "We will need a new master of coin," he said. "Find me one who can say no to me when it matters," Robert said, and the room thought of John Arryn without speaking his name the way men think of water when they are thirsty and do not want to admit it. "And who isn't a corrupt little—" He stopped himself and spread his hands as if to say he had not finished the sentence in the interest of civility. "Who is honest? The notion of an honest master of coin is a jest too heavy to carry far," Peter might have said. But Peter was not here to say it. When the council broke, the corridors had a sound to tea. Hem! A news sound. The keep was already speaking in the way companionable buildings do. Ned walked with Jory at his shoulder out into sunlight that had gathered its courage and showed the city more plainly. He stopped in an arcade to look down toward the river. The Blackwater moved brown and patient. Beyond it, the Dornishman's wife, the ship with red sails, tugged at her moorings as if in mild dream. The city was as it had been, while inside the stone a line had shifted. "Will he kill him?" Jory asked at last quietly. "Robert says he will have a trial," Ned said. "Men who promise a trial sometimes mean a walk." Jory made a face. "He had friends, that one." "Friends are a kind of coin," Ned said. "He taught us that much. We will see who spends his name now." Varys found Ned before the day folded fully, as a moth finds a candle. He appeared in the shadow of an alcove whose small garden had never been anything but a potted fig with leaves like oiled leather. He was pale and perspiring with sympathy. "My Lord Hand," he said, "I grieve that we are thrust into ill theater." "Speak plain," Ned said. Varys tilted his head. "Lord Baelish sits now in a black cell and considers the value of silence. He is more dangerous in solitary thought than he ever was at our table. Men like him are taught by their own hearts how to make daggers out of reflections. He will find a way to cut with them if we do not allow him an audience, and soon." "He will have a trial," Ned said. "In the meantime he will have visitors," Varys replied, and the gentleness in his voice turned the sentence into three. "Certain people will feel moved to secure their interests. It may be that our jailers will be visited by generous accidents. A man who has made coin flow is never left thirsty unless one intends to watch him die of thirst." "Do you intend that?" Ned asked. Varys lowered his eyes. "I intend very little," he murmured. "I survive by intending almost nothing." He lifted his hands a fraction. "But I confess I should not like to have to survive Peter Baelish angry with me. He has so much practice being angry with others." "You call him Peter," Ned said, "and others call him Littlefinger. Men are told who they are by the mouths that say their names, Lord Stark. It is why it matters who speaks the king's name in public places." Varys' smile came like a suggestion for mercy. "I came to tell you that the queen is not pleased." "I did not expect her to be," Ned said. "She has reasons of her own to keep certain coin flows moving," Varys said. "Lord Baelish was a helpful stream. The queen is a gardener who understands irrigation." "Then we will see whether the ground hardens," Ned said. Varys' gaze drifted to the fig tree leaves. "There are plants that prefer drought." He drew a breath and released it carefully. "It is dangerous to remove a spider with your bare hand unless you know whether what it bites with is poison or merely annoyance. You name him a spider. You must choose which of you is insulted." Varys smiled fully and bowed. "Spiders at least are tireless." He left as he entered, in a way that made the air he vacated seem to close behind him with mild regret. In the black cells below, night never quite ceased. The walls bled damp. The torches soothed no one and did not so much illuminate as wound the dark enough to make it watch. Peter Baelish sat on stone and saw in the seeping lines the abstract figures of his former ledgers. One might have said he had known poverty when he was fostered in the Vale, thin winters, thinner stew, and learned there to make a game of little. But poverty was a broad plateau, and he had since walked off it into the cliff's edge opposite. To return now to the old ground should have been nothing more than a clever anecdote if he lived to tell it. It was not the cell that stung him, it was the manner. He kept his back straight because he had taught it to prefer straightness when other things went crooked. When the rat moved along the rim of the puddle by his foot, he did not flinch. Rats are colleagues to men who count. He found himself humming in the echoing way that a man hums in a stairwell to prove to himself he is alone. The tune came from before memory, a fragment of some Vale song he had made rude lyrics for in his youth to make the girls laugh. The girls had laughed if he paid for it. Some had learned to laugh for free, and one had never laughed at all except with contempt, which he had found more precious than laughter. The door rasped. The jailer held the torch in a way that made the light curl around his arm hair and leave his face mostly in a red haze of warmth. Another figure stood beyond the circle of flame. "I have never liked underground places," Varys said, soft as if he were telling someone else a secret. "They remember unkindness. They remember whispers," Peter said. "You must be a saint down here. Saints are so inconveniently dead," Varys murmured. "Whereas I am alive." He inclined his head. "As are you." "For now," Peter said. He smiled at the notion and at the jailer's posture changing with the sound of that smile. "Have you come with a key in your tongue?" "I have come with curiosity," Varys said. "You are a man of resource. Resource is a kind of current. I wondered if you meant to redirect it to flood a particular neighbor." "I am fond of gardens," Peter said. "You may tell our queen that." "Our queen is familiar with your horticulture," Varys replied. "She relied upon your channeling of certain streams. She is displeased to find a dry bed." "The king means to lay stones," Peter said. "He forgets that stones remember the men who throw them, and that the men who build roads now might wish to build walls later." "Walls keep certain kinds of people out," Varys said. "They also keep certain kinds in. I am unclear whether you are more dangerous in motions or in stillness." "You are unclear," Peter said, "because you prefer to be. Clarity forces kindness from men. They must either be kind or admit they are not." Varys's eyes did something like sorrow. "And what does the clarity of iron make kings admit?" he asked gently. "That they prefer the smell of their own blood to the thought of someone else's cleverness," Peter said. He leaned his head back to touch the wet stone, as if it were cool pillow feather. "Do make sure the queen knows that I am not the kind of man who forgives forgetfulness. It is such a small sin, after all, to forget an appointment one had with the man who taught one the calendar." Varys took in a breath and allowed it to go back where it had come from. "It may be that all you need do is wait. Kings grow tired of their own declarations before they grow tired of their appetites." "I am patient," Peter said. "I have been patient since I was a boy with a knife wound and a lesson." His voice stayed pleasant, which was worse than if it had gone hard. "But I do not intend to sit here and let the story be written in someone else's neat hand. If I must write with my own blood, it will at least be in my own script." "Blood is a poor ink," Varys said. "It dries too dark and no one can read the intentions afterward. I will tell the queen you are, as you have always been." He made a delicate gesture and turned away. The torch went with him, and Peter let the dark step across the threshold like a careful guest who had been waiting for invitation. When Ned went at last to his rooms, the day had acquired a brittle edge. Sansa had been sent lemon cakes by the queen. Arya had misplaced a wooden sword that had no business being anywhere but in her hand. That domestic matter troubled him in a way that wars had not. There was always a way to field judge whether one had won a battle. Fatherhood was a battle that kept moving the markers. He found himself staring at the two beds beyond the folding screen, the linen smooth on one and a chaos on the other, and he could not say whether the sight comforted him or made him feel as if the keep had been built over a sinkhole. He found his thoughts turning as often to Catelyn. He wrote to her as the candle traded height for light, and the words were the simple, strong ones he had always had. I miss the words from your mouth. I miss the mind behind your eyes. The king has done a thing that will send many other things in motion. I do not know whether to put my hand out to slow them or to keep it close to my own side. Tell Rob that a lord is measured as much by the patience he shows to his hounds as by the quickness he shows to his enemies. Tell Bran I think of him every hour. He paused, pen over parchment, then wrote finally, do not come south. After, he wanted to cross that out and could not bring himself to mar the paper. He sealed the letter with his dire wolf, and the wax took the impression cleanly, as if the wolf were content with orders it had not given. The city did what cities do. It made a tale of what it had heard and told it to itself until it liked the taste. By evening the stalls in the Shadow City were saying the Master of Coin had been caught in a whore's bed with a ledger, that the king had found him stealing the gold leaf from the Seven's altar, that he had attempted to make off with the crown jewels in a pie. A child sang a rhymed couplet about a little man with little morals hopping to the noose. The words scissored the air neatly. In the manse that had belonged to Baelish, a steward with poor teeth took an inventory of goblets and looked, without despair, at a future in which his precarious employment would be precarious under new masters. The queen stood by a window pierced for archers and stared out as if the river might answer an insult. Her green gown took light and threw it back at the room. Jaime leaned with the casual insolence of one who has earned indulgence by the shape of his sinews and the brightness of his hair. He spun a dagger on his palm and caught it by the tip each time with the easy cruelty of a boy playing with an insect. He has taken the man out, Cersei said finally, and her voice sounded as if she had been holding it in her chest and it had grown hot. A useful man. Useful, Jaime repeated, tasting the word and finding nothing. Slimy little eel. Not much to drink. He greased gears you do not even know are there, Cersei said. Coin is a blood one does not see until it stops moving, and then the man is already dead. Perhaps the man is the king, Jaime said pleasantly. Her eyes slid to him, green as a cruel sea. Do not be flippant. I find flippancy the only antidote to much of what drips here, Jaime said. He tossed the dagger once more, caught it by the hilt this time, and set it with a mild click against the table. The king is in a humor. Let him have his heads. The realm does not end each time a head rolls. I have seen it fail to end many times. You have seen battlefields, Cersei said. This is a different kind of field. It grows flowers of a different stink, he agreed. You want the man free? I want him where I can use him, she said. It may be freer than a cell or not as free as the court. He built things out of promises. I had places to put those things. She turned her face back to the river. Robert will tire of his anger in 2 days. His anger is like a fire he builds for company. He sits close to it, he warms himself, he grows bored and goes to drink. She laced her fingers and pressed until the knuckles paled. But if someone stokes it, you think Stark will stoke it? Stark will stoke nothing, she said. He is too clean to dirty his hands with cinders. He will make a judgment as if judgment were a thing not tied to power. He will hang Baelish if he thinks Baelish wicked. That is why he is dangerous. And here I thought it was me, Jaime said. It is you, Cersei replied, and the look she gave him then had in it the untidy love of a child who never learned to share. But you can be used. Honor cannot. Honor must be fenced around. Jaime made a little bow. Fence me then, he said, but tell me when to unlatch the gate. I am bored. Soon, she said. She was not looking at him. Very soon. In the vale, high above clouds that were no more than a sea that had misplaced its light, a raven came with a ribbon of royal seal that had been broken and made whole again by hands that had practiced at such mending. Lisa Arryn received the message in her solar and put a hand flat to the parchment before she read it, as if to feel in its warmth how new the words were. She read, and the world changed shape without moving. He's to be tried, she said aloud and did not realize she had spoken, because Robert Arryn had been pulling at her sleeve and he made a small fretful sound. He is to be, she whispered, and then her mouth filled with the taste of tin as if she had bitten her own tongue. She sat down very quickly. "Mother?" Sweet Robin asked. He had been building a little wall of soldiers upon the table, and the wall fell over when she sat, even though she had not touched it. He made a small desolate sound and looked imploringly at her, as if she could reset his world to its proper towers with a hand. "Play," she said, her hand fluttering like a torn banner. "Play, my sweet love." She looked at the words one by one as if they had been set down to trick her. The letters formed her own dread. "Master of coin," it said. "Under charge. Trial." The handwriting was neat, the maester's ink scarcely gone from brown to black. The death of a man was being conducted in the polite grammar of government. Peter had written to her many times in a script that took certain liberties the way a kiss takes a liberty. He had called her "dear heart," with a sincerity that stood up well to the light if she held it only briefly there. He had promised her that the city he kept was a city that could hold her secret the way a palm holds a pearl. Now she thought of him in a cell, and the thought shook loose something that had been clinging inside her for years, like the cobweb that she had never had dusted behind the bed hangings because it was shaped like a delicate crown. "Lady," said Maester Coleman from the doorway, because he had not learned the diffidence required by a woman who needed her own fantasies as much as she needed air. "Is all well? I am reading the king's humor," she said. "It is changeable." She stood. The room swayed toward her like a curtsy. She steadied herself with the table's edge and knocked over Sweetrobin's soldier wall completely. The boy cried as if she had slapped him. She took his head in both hands and kissed his hair. "Hush!" she whispered with an intensity that made the word a command to the world. "Hush now." She had killed a man once with a drop. She had done it in daytime and night both. The drop had been in a cup. The cup had been in a hand. The hand had been a good hand once. No one had ever thanked her for the thing that had saved her child. Now another man might be killed without any of her drops, and there was no safety at all in that. Without Peter to tell her where to put her fear, she found she had nowhere to put it but in her son's hair, the smell of his scalp an anchor to which she could lash herself. In Dragonstone the sea beat itself to pieces and put itself back together like a soldier at drill. Stannis Baratheon stood by an embrasure and scowled at a gray brightness. The painted table lay behind him, the black woods carrying a continent as if it were a coin he had been charged with not spending. Davos Seaworth stood off to one side, his hands hanging easily and his eyes like the eyes of a man who has learned to watch how weather forms over salt. There were candles, well-spaced and efficient, and the room smelled of wax and storm. "They have taken Baelish in the capital," Stannis said. He did not turn when he spoke. The words would not have changed if he had. "It is just. He made a game of sums until sums made a game of the crown." Davos did not say he had seen games made of worse. He ran his thumb across the scar stubs that were the price of a smuggler made knight. "And his grace? What humor takes him?" "The humor of a butcher who has discovered a hemorrhage," Stannis said, "and is now looking to see which of his knives is to blame." He did turn then, and his mouth was like a wound that had learned discipline. "It will not be enough. They will blame the man who makes the money, when it is their appetite that eats it." "The king will not hear that from me," Davos said. "He will not hear that from anyone," Stannis said, "least of all his own brother." He put his hand on the table where the narrow sea curved like a blade. "In a just realm, there would be a law for every extravagance and a punishment for every man who dips his cup twice. In a just realm." He stopped and looked at Davos as if at a chart. "I will go to court again when the air there can be breathed. At present it smells of perfume and incest." Davos did not blink at the last word. He had heard many worse words with poorer proof. He did not ask for the proof. Men like Stannis created their own proofs from suspicion and law and the shapes of children's faces, and even when they were only wrong by a hair. He looked again at the window where the sea kept mastering itself, and thought of how the world's largest things obey rules so simple they can be counted with shells on a beach. It was the men who made complexity where none was required. The day crept forward. In the training yard, Arya Stark was instructed by a man whose grace had been tempered in a very different sun than this one. Farrell's legs made shapes with the air as he moved, and Arya's wooden sword tapped perhaps a heartbeat too late after his. The sound of their practice was neither loud nor soft. It was in time with Arya's breathing. She could hold the concentration beyond the point that made the world blur. She could hold it long enough to make the blur thin and see something beyond. "What do we say to the god of death?" Syrio asked, almost bored. "Not today," Arya said through her teeth. "Not ever," Syrio corrected. "We do not say childish things to the gods. The gods do not listen. We say only the thing that is true. Not today is true only if it is not today." He flicked the tip of her practice blade to the outside with as much attention as one brushes a fly. "Again." She struck, again, and when she had finished and sweat had slicked her hair to her forehead, she found Sandor Clegane watching from the far side with the kind of amusement a man has for a cat that thinks it is a panther. He did not grin with it. The scar would not allow it. He nodded to her once without warmth. Felt like something. Sansa at the same hour sat with Septa Mordain and stitched a rose with disciplined small bites of thread. The lemon cakes the queen had sent had been sugar-soft in the mouth. She had eaten one and saved one and offered one to the Septa because it was gracious to offer, and had been relieved when the Septa had refused. Lemon had a way of faking cheer. One could drink it and believe one had been lifted above what one really was. Sansa preferred cheer that did not require proof. She thought of the king's hunt, and of the songs that would be made, and of the way Joffrey's hair took the sun as if it had been minted for him. She would be kind to him at supper and he would be moved, she hoped, to say something in that voice he could make when it was only for her, softer than fur. She had heard the ladies whisper that a man had been taken by the king's order, and that some men whispered back the queen was angry. Grown-ups talk. The city swam in it. It had nothing to do with a girl's heart. She set her needle neatly. The rose grew. At dusk, when the wind turned and brought a smell of river rot and low tide, Ned Stark went to the cells. He did not do it out of pity. He did not do it out of cruelty. He did it because it was a thing a man in his place should do when another fell by a decision made in his hearing. Jory and 2 of his men came with him and stood near enough to be of use, far enough to let the words be private. The jailer had the look that jailers always have. A man who knows he is disliked for what his work requires and has made an uneasy friend of indifference. He unlocked the door to the black cells with a relish for ritual, the iron speaking in old voices. Peter looked up when Ned came. The torch made his face an alternating geography of gorge and gully. He smiled as if he had expected a different face and was amused by this one. "You have come to see me with or without coin," he said. "I have come to tell you what I will tell the king," Ned said. The smell in the cell was of damp and something that had been alive and was now less alive by half. "That you will have a trial, and that you will not be mistreated before it." "His Grace promises many things," Peter said. "He usually promises the right thing. He only delivers it when it is the easy thing." His hand moved in the air as if it held a quill. "You, my lord, will tell him to do the right thing even when it is the hard thing. It is fortunate for poets that men like you are rarely obeyed." "Have you anything to say in your defense?" Ned asked. He heard how stiff the question sounded. He could not make it otherwise. One does not rehearse the lines for this part of a man's life. "I will say that I did not steal from the crown any more than the crown stole from itself," Peter said. "I will say that if you remove the man who has taught the city to live on promises, the city will learn to break them with greater ease." He smiled again, more tiredly. "I will say that I should have been kinder to you when you were a boy, if only so you might feel now that there is something to save." Ned did not flinch. "You were not unkind to me when I was a boy," he said. "You were unkind to Brandon. He was not kind to you. That is a story that has no lesson in it." "There is always a lesson," Peter said. "It is only that sometimes the lesson is for someone else." He looked down at his own hands as if they might have secrets from him. "Will Catelyn hear that I am for the blade?" "She will hear what she must," Ned said. He would not have spoken her name here in this place if Peter had not put it into the air. To let it hang unanswered would have made it a kind of surrender. "She has other matters." She always had, Peter murmured. I learned to love a woman who was never not busy with obligations. Suited me, or it suited the story I wanted. He lifted his eyes. Do tell her I thought of her kindly if I have voiceless moments before the edge enters me. If you cannot tell her kindly, tell her cruelly. It will mean more from you. Ned put his hand upon the doorpost. The stone was slick, not slick. The way old stone gets when it has been touched by 100,000 men who were trying to steady themselves. If you have any truth to tell me that would help me make justice, he said. Tell it now. Peter's mouth moved. For a brief instant Ned Stark thought he saw there an undisguised thing, something like nakedness. Then Peter blinked it into clothing. The truth, he said. He clicked his tongue softly. The truth is that debts are a conspiracy to make men love their masters. The truth is that the Queen's children are dangerous to anyone who loves the order of things as they should be. The truth is that Varys wants a king who will bleed at the right times. The truth is that if I had another day outside these walls, I could make them all true at once. He tilted his head, and in the damp, the delicate wreck of his hair made a better case for him than his words. Does that help? It exhausts, Ned said. He nodded to the jailer, and the door began to close. If you carry the truth like a sword, you must remember it has two edges, Peter said as the black moved in. One for your enemies, and one for your hand. The door swallowed the rest. When the day of the trial was named, the city behaved as if there would be a pageant. Men who liked to watch pain prepared their appetites. Men who liked to watch law prepared their dignity. Men who liked to watch the king prepared to be satisfied with whatever they were given and told was meat. The king himself wore his black and gold and went to hearing as to a bear pit, restless. Pycelle fussed, which was what he knew to do, and brought forth old precedent like old cheese. Varys drifted and watched. Renly took a new mantle. Ned sat where the hand sits. The charges were laid out like a table for guests. Misappropriation of funds. Diversion of crown revenue. Taking of bribes. The courtroom had a sound like a hive. Peter Baelish came in thinner by want of light and with his chin more carefully placed upon his neck, as if he had weighed each angle. He did not bow to the hand. He did not bow to the king. He only stood. It is a trick of such gatherings that they last longer than anyone expects and mean less than anyone hopes. Witnesses were called. Sub-stewards who had met Peter's agents and admired their penmanship. A moneylender who had been invited to dine and found the wine excellent. A captain of the city watch who had received coin for his men's shoes and then never seen the shoes but had seen that the men walked nonetheless. There were books brought, the ledgers heavy as a siege prayer. The scratch of pages made a tidy sound for a while. Peter's voice, when he answered questions, had a light that did not reach his eyes. He did not bother to pretend he had not made arrangements with the great houses. To pretend that would be to insult the room. He described the bargains in the careful way a woman describes embroidery to another woman, admiring the craft while disclaiming any concern for the outcome. He conceded freely where concession could not harm him, and smiled when he could not concede without harming someone, anyone. When the laws had been exhausted, which is a different thing than being finished, the king leaned forward and the courtroom leaned with him. You made a cuckold of my treasury, Robert said. I would have your apology. For what? Peter asked. For making me a poor man, the king said. Your grace, Peter said, and up to the last heartbeat he was himself. A poor man who knows he is poor and attends to it can be rich in 2 years. A rich man who does not know he is poor is a corpse with a ring on his finger before the year is out. There was some murmur. Robert's jaw made a shape that knew the old familiar path of rage and tested the dirt that had been packed there. He looked at Ned with something like appeal. Past. He straightened. The weight of the court's breath pressed against his next words. I have made judgments, he said. I can make more. Peter Baelish, Littlefinger, whatever you are called. Your head would look odd on a pike, but I want to try. He made a motion then with 2 fingers. It was scarcely more than a shiver of the hand, and yet the histories of certain men and certain women took their secondary shapes from it. Sir Ilan Payne stepped forward with the expressionless patience of a man who has been given one thing to do for his whole life and will do it until a god tells him to cease. Peter looked at the blade the way a gambler looks at a deck from which he knows he has removed none of the bad cards. He took a breath like a man tasting a new wine and marked with a small tilt of his head that it was not to his palate. He turned his face a fraction so that when the sword came down the light took his cheek in a particular way. In that instant he was as handsome as he had always wanted to be when he had peered in a boy's mirror and tried to imagine himself from other eyes. The sword flashed like an answer that had always been waiting for the question. Men who had come to be aroused were aroused. Men who had come to be satisfied were satisfied. And one man, Eddard Stark, felt only the cold correctness of an end that neither mended nor destroyed anything it should. Afterward, the city had a new thing to tell itself. Told it thoroughly. Boys sang a different song about a little man and his little neck. A whore in the street of Silk raised a cup and said she had never cared for clients who asked to be called my lord in bed. Another wept and called Peter's name as if that might bring him up through the floorboards. A third counted the coin he had always left after and put it away without giving it a thought. The queen did not weep. She went to the sept and knelt in a way that made a painting of piety for anyone watching and thought, while her lips formed prayers, of which men to invite to a very private supper. When she rose, she told Lancel to see that certain spice merchants were paid what was owed, and told Ser Barristan she would see the king after he had drunk himself quiet. She saw Jaime last. He came in with his easy step and stopped with one foot inside the circle of a particular rug, as if he had not been invited past it yet. "Well," he said. "It begins," she said. "Everything always begins and ends," Jaime said. "I sometimes think those are the only two things that happen." "The hand will sooner tell the king his children are not his than let him live a lie that rots the kingdom's core," Cersei said. "He will find proof because he looks for it as if it were a deer in the woods. He will show Robert the antlers. Robert will charge. I must be ready to pull the antlers away." She crossed to him then and put her hand on the place between his ribs where a woman who had once loved him had said his heart lived. "Stay close. I was never far," he said. The name of their sin was not spoken. It traveled through the room without hindrance and sat in the chair by the fire and warmed its hands. That night Robert did drink himself toward quiet, and in the swaying years that lay behind him there were many men in whom he could see the boy he had been and be comforted by the memory. Ned Stark sat with him for a time and said very little. They shared a few words that were not enough and a silence that was more than enough, and then they parted as men part at a ford where the current has changed and neither believes the other can swim as he thinks swimming should be done. On the morrow Ned went out into the city with only Jory and a handful of men and the question burning in him that the trial had not cooled. He went where lists had never taken him. He found a smith with an apprentice's arms who trembled when he bowed, and a woman who had called the king father, once with a different meaning than the one the court used, and a boy with black hair and eyes like the mouth of a cave. When he came back to the keep he sat with the pieces and saw they wanted to be a whole. He saw too the shape of the thing that the whole would be. He breathed out once through his nose, hard, the way a horse does when it meets a wind that smells of fire. He went to the godswood that the Targaryens had built out of habit, though they had no need of such trees, and he sat beneath it as if it had the face he knew in the north. The weirwood here was sickly and pale, its carved face a caricature made by hands that had not loved the thing they were carving. He spoke to it nonetheless, because men keep the forms of their youth when there is no one to chide them. He asked for nothing. He told nothing. He simply let his breath knit into the leaf shadows and made a prayer that was more gratitude for the fact that he could pray at all than it was petition for any result. In the Eyrie, Lisa read other letters and wrote one in a hand that shook and sealed it with 3 applications of wax as if wax were a wall. She sent it down the mountain with a man she trusted and then sent another man to shadow the first, and then another to shadow the shadow, so that if either betrayed her the other would catch him and she would be vindicated by her own paranoia. She did not sleep after. She sat beside her son's bed and told him stories from when his father had been alive, and the stories were all lies. At Dragonstone, a red woman with eyes the color of a forge came to Stannis's hall. He watched her walk in and thought, for the first time in many months, that there might be a kind of fire that did not require the approval of the court to be fed. He did not trust the feeling and trusted her less. He made her speak until he could place in the shapes of her sentences where truth hid its face. Davos watched and thought that there are many ways for a drowning man to believe he has found a raft. In the street of steel, a man named Tobo Mott turned a length of iron in a light that had come from a star and had never been meant for men's hands. He did not yet know he would be asked to speak about the things he had forged. He only knew that the heat made his teeth ache and the music in the hammering soothed him the way decent bread does. His apprentice, a boy with the mark of a bastard on his cheeks where a woman had kissed him too urgently once before leaving him in fate's keeping, looked at the iron and saw his own future in it, hot, malleable, needing a strike at the right angle to become a better shape. He went to fetch water and did not see the man who watched him go with eyes that measured. The castle settled into a new posture. It did not feel, in the wake of Baelish's death, like a thing cleansed, felt like a thing rearranged. In the small council chamber, the chair Peter had used sat too far from the table until a servant pushed it nearer, and the servants had a look on their faces when they did it that said they knew they were moving a ghost. The Queen's ladies whispered names and times. The hand wrote letters in a hand that looked like it had been carved into the page with a clean knife. The king planned a hunt and did not know that when he rode to it, he would carry with him all the decisions of this week, any one of which would be a sharper spear than boar's tusks. On the last night before the hunting horns were to sound, the air was soft, sticky as unbaked dough. Ned stood at his balcony and longed for cold. He thought of winter's air, the way it entered you like a guest with manners, quiet, cleansing, and found himself absurdly near to tears. He did not weep. Men of the north do their weeping in their marrow. He pressed his hands to the stone rail and felt the warmth there, and thought of how warmth could be a deceit. His father had told him once that a man must be careful with comfort. It teaches you to forgive what should not be forgiven. There was a knock and Jory came. "The king asks for you, my lord," he said. Ned turned his back on the river and faced the life he had accepted. "Very well," he said. They found Robert already half drunk, his smile like a wound that a man keeps worrying with his tongue. He put an arm around Ned and told him of the boar he meant to kill, of the boys who would ride with them, of the wine they would take and the jokes they would tell. He said the names of women the way men say the names of dogs they have owned and loved a little. He grew tender suddenly at one returning memory, and in that softness his eyes lost some belligerence. He said Lyanna, and Ned felt the old tether pull at him as if he were not a man of weight. "How did we become these?" Robert asked, sudden as a boy. "You a man who counts like a money changer, and me a man who kills men for stealing from their own king." Ned did not tell him that they had been becoming these all along. He said, "We are what time makes of us." "Then time is a poor craftsman," Robert said and laughed and drained a cup and called for another. "We will ride tomorrow. Stark, come ride and forget all this." He gestured broadly and included the court, the walls, the ledgers, the city, the crown, the women, the lies. "I will ride," Ned said, though part of him wanted to stay and read the truth he had gathered onto the page of the king's ear. He would write it there without grace. He would write it there in ink so dark it could not be washed. But there were times when the body and friendship asked their dues, and if he did not pay them now, he might not have a friend to pay at all. He left Robert singing a song about a girl from the Stormlands who had cheated at dice, and went to his rooms and slept badly and briefly. He dreamed of a hand closing around a blade and of blood that would not quite wash off no matter how many times he put his hands in snow. When he woke, the hawkers were already making their morning music, the city birds were already stealing their crumbs, and the Blackwater was sliding past with its brown patience, green in places where the light insisted. He dressed in riding clothes, wearing the white shirt Caitlin had once sewn him, thread neat as her mind. He took up the chain of the hand and held it for a moment before setting it down again in the carved box as if laying a snake gently to rest. He would not ride with it. In the yard the horses stamped and blew steam like reticent dragons, and the king was laughing. Men whose names mattered less than their passions mounted and jostled. There was Lancel, pale and earnest. There was Renly, perfect and easy. There was a boy from the Reach with a laugh that made girls lean out of windows. There was a man from the Riverlands with a sullen mouth and a good seat. The hounds capered as if they were free to make poetry and had chosen to write with their paws in the dust. Circe watched from above with a sip of wine and a stillness that made the air near her cooler than the morning. Jaime stood with her and made some comment that made one of the ladies laugh, and the queen did not. Varys watched from somewhere that had no vantage in all of them. Pycelle was absent because the sun was cruel to his old joints. Jory made a small joke to one of the men and grinned, and the grin set Ned's spirits right for a fraction. It pleased him more than any speech might have. They rode out, hooves like drums. The walls accepted their leaving without ceremony. The city opened like a throat and swallowed them down the road and then forgot them because the city has too much to remember. Behind them, in the cool belly of the keep, a new master of coin would be named in time. In the black cells, the stone forgot the heat of a living body. In the street of steel, a boy hammered where he was told. In the sept, prayers braided themselves around what people truly wanted and did nothing to change it. In the Vale, the ravens left in a dark string, carrying letters whose sentences made promises they could not keep. In Dragonstone, a candle guttered and righted itself. The Red Woman smiled in a way that made a new language out of old hunger. Davos touched wood and trusted the old language of the sea instead. In Winterfell, a wind had a knife in it and cut nothing but memory. Catelyn Stark sat with Hoster's letter and Ned's letter and folded them with careful fingers and told herself that carefulness was what men could give to women when they could not give them their presence. Far away, across water that did not care for thrones, a young woman with silver in her hair stood on a balcony and felt something like a change pass through her that was not the wind. She did not know that a man whose schemes had once brushed against her fate had died under a sword that had not been forged for such uses. She only knew the world had twitched, and she steadied herself on a column and told herself not to imagine omens. In her womb something turned very softly and went on sleeping. And in King's Landing, in the hour when the sun climbs enough to forgive the idea of day, a few pieces had been moved in a game that pretended not to be one. The board would be the same until it was not. Men would underestimate which piece mattered. Men would die of that underestimation. Between now and then, the story would go on like the river, indifferent and inevitable, passing everything that clung to its banks with the kind of patience that kills. The road bent low between stands of beech and hornbeam, the trunks pale and clean as the shanks of cut bone, and then rose into scrub where wind had teeth in it. The hunting horns sounded in playful notes that pretended they were not commands. Robert rode at the center of the swarm, his good horse stepping as if proud that it carried a king. He wore no crown, he wore the memory of one. Men who had seen him in his first youth looked sometimes for the steel that had once been in him like a second spine, and sometimes they found it, a flicker at the corner of the mouth, a flare in the eyes when talk turned to brothers and oaths, and sometimes they did not. All morning the flare was there. "Do you remember the pines below Storm's End?" he called over his shoulder, not caring who heard. "The scent of them? The way the air does not move there even when a gale sits 10 feet off the ground and hammers the banners? You could throw a dagger and it would stop and think before it fell." Ned kept an easy pace beside him. "I remember the night before we broke Mace Tyrell's patience," he said. "The way you slept like a boy and woke like a drumbeat." Robert laughed and Rosby's horse shied at it, then settled, ashamed of itself. Renly's green cloak took the light in a piece of the track where the leaves opened up like a hand. Lancel came up at a trot on his narrow-bellied gelding with a wineskin in both hands like a child entrusted with something sacred. "Your Grace," he said, and his voice had the eager tremble of a dog learning to bark. "A taste." "Later," Robert said, and his grin was generous. "We'll drink when we smell boar. I want my mouth clean until I can fill it with the beast's blood." He slapped Lancel's cheek with 2 fingers as if blessing him. The boy flushed scarlet and fell back with the skin held to his ribs, his eyes slipping sideways at the Queen's brother riding a little behind. They found sign at mid-morning where the bracken lay flattened as if a large, disinterested god had sat for a time to think about the affairs of smaller creatures. The Master of Hounds knelt in it, the dogs circling with their tails writing their opinions in the air. He lifted a tuft of coarse dark hair from a thicket thorn and rubbed it between finger and thumb. "Old," he said, "but not yesterday old." He pointed with his chin the way men point when the hand is busy with evidence. Water that way. He'll have taken the stream. We can push and hope. Hope is for small folk, Robert said. We'll push. He looked contented with the notion that work would deliver the thing he wanted. Work had always delivered things to Robert. Men's loyalty, women's attention, meat, victories, wine. It had not delivered him peace, but he had learned to call that a god's miserliness rather than any fault of his own. They spread. The dogs' voices threaded the brush, broke, wove again. The woods were as full of small noises as a market. Once a hare sprang terrified from under Renly's horse, and Renly, without changing expression, let it go as if pity were a fashion he did not wish to be seen wearing. Twice a pheasant lifted, churning the air with its harsh wings, and Lancel jumped both times, then looked around angrily to see if anyone had marked it. No one had except Sandor Clegane, and the hound's mouth turned in a way that was not a smile and served the same function. They pressed through a strip of alder that made the ground spongy under the hooves and put the whole party in a bow. The line of men curving near the stream. The water went talking over stones as if it had seen enough of their kind and had decided opinions. Ned's knee pained him when he dismounted to move a dangling branch so a horse could pass without blooding its flanks. He felt the leak of ache and did not mention it. Ache is as useless as appetite for men who must work. At noon they halted in a clearing that gave them a fine view of not much. The trees were generous with shade and parsimonious with vistas. The grooms came up with cold meats and bread and a cheese that had been salt-cured until it squeaked beneath the knife, and Lancel moved among them with skins and a careful pride. Robert reclined with his back against a lichen-dusted stone and let the sunlight look at him. When the boy came near with the wine, the king took the skin and drank, then drank again, and tossed it back to Lancel with an absent-minded flick. "Another," he said, "and bring Lord Stark a cup. He'll go stiff if we don't oil him." Ned took what was offered, smelling the wine before he tasted it. Strong and sweet both, with a bite that reminded him of brandy and something darker below. He sipped and handed it to Jory without ceremony. Jory set it aside after a swallow as if he did not wish to carry the flavor too far. "You look at me like a septon when I drink," Robert told Ned lazily. "Don't be an old woman. The dogs will do the smelling today." "You said you wanted your mouth clean until it had boar in it," Ned said. He kept his tone mild out of habit and friendship. Robert snorted. "I said many things when there was nothing to drink." He gestured at the woods with a heavy hand. "He's out there, a great brute, bigger than the pigs in the kitchens at Storm's End. What do they call him? The King of the Wood? I like him already." He tore a strip from the cheese and chewed, then flung the remainder to one of the dogs with an accuracy that made the men laugh and the dog grateful for royal crumbs. Renly crouched near a mossy stump and ate neat pieces of meat from a silver knife, talking about a new tailor in the Street of Sisters who had the hands of a god and prices to match. Sandor rumbled a contemptuous note that might have been laughter. "It's a hunt," he said, "not a promenade." He bit into bread without softer company. The sunlight turned. The shadows thickened. They moved again, slower now as if they had learned something about the woods and the woods had learned something about them. Lancel's pores grew more frequent, with the care of a man following instructions precisely. Once he looked up and met Ned's eyes and dropped his gaze at once like a boy caught where he should not be. The boar sign grew fresher. The dogs lifted their muzzles and their cries acquired a thread of greed. Somewhere a creature blundered in panic and the underbrush answered. The master of hounds pulled the pack back with a whip crack and a curse that sounded affectionate. "Ho!" Robert said, pleased as a man whose meat has walked into his kitchen on its own legs. "Ho, you fat lord!" The charge was sudden and was not. The dogs went wild in one direction and the men's attention followed them, and the boar came from another place, the way trouble comes when you are watching the door. The shrubbery exploded. A black mass with a wet mouth and a razored grin came low and fast, the tusks pale and obscene, the small eyes intelligent with malice. The smell was rank and hot and alive. Robert surged up with a shout that was half joy, half fury, and in that motion he was the young lord again, the man who had broken Rieger and a world. The spear took on a mind quickly and went where he told it. Men yelled. Horses screamed. Something cracked like a bone against a tree. Lancel bolted sideways and tangled his gelding in a sapling. Ned's sword was out without his having decided to draw it. The weight a comfort and an accusation both. The boar hit the spear like a boulder accepting instruction, and the spearhead went in with a wet sound that one hears at the edge of sleep for years after. The beast twisted, tasted wood, went deeper on its own hatred. Robert grunted, braced, shoved, and the shaft snapped. The boar came on, all that mass now leveling its anger at the thing that had dared to resist it. And in that motion the tusk carved a terrible red across Robert's belly where the male had ridden up when he lunged. The sound he made was not human for a heartbeat and then was entirely human. Jory's blade darted in, glanced away, came again. Another spear found the shoulder, another the haunch. The dogs swarmed with frantic courage and were flung like ragdolls. Sandor came from Robert's right and put steel where it mattered. The boar's hind legs failed it in a sudden convulsion, and it collapsed into a shaking lump that still had in its dying the conviction of murder. Robert's boot went to its muzzle, ground down like a victory that owed something to fury. The beast shuddered, subsided. The clearing was still except for men's gasps and a high whine from a dog that did not know if it was killed or only frightened. Robert stayed on his feet, somehow. Blood made a dark river down the white of his tunic and then disappeared into the darker fabric beneath, and his hands were red to the wrist. He looked down at the boar as if amused that it had dared. He kicked again out of principle and lost balance and went to one knee with an oath that had no energy in it. Lancel stood 10 feet away, staring as if he had never seen either animal or king. "Your Grace," Ned said, and the words were ordinary and useless. He knelt, and he and Jory eased Robert down together with the care one uses for a friend's pride when the friend has lost more blood than a man should. "It's nothing," Robert said, grinning though his mouth was too white. "It's a scratch. You should have seen the other." His left hand fumbled for the wineskin as if it had become an amulet. Lancel thrust it at him, appalled with eagerness. Robert drank, gasped, drank again. His eyes found Ned's. "We got him," he said, as if this were a long campaign that had needed a conclusion. "We did," Ned said. One of the dogs licked at the blood disbelievingly and Sandor kicked it away without ceremony. "We must get you back to the city." Robert made a face at the notion of retreat and then his features smoothed like a canvas being stretched. "Yes," he said, and the word had become obedient. He let his head fall back against Jory's leather and stared at the canopy as if it were a too elaborate ceiling in a noble's house he did not respect. "I've been worse," he added, and then lower. "I've been better." They carried him. The men improvised a litter from saplings and cloaks and the kind of ingenuity that makes no speeches. The boar was dragged behind with a rope looped through its jaws, a grotesque parody of a sledge being hauled through winter. The party's mood had sharpened. Jokes wandered lost and found no homes. Lancel rode close, his face sick, his hands ridiculous with steadiness when he proffered wine that Robert took without thanks. By the time they reached the road, Robert's consciousness had learned the tactic of coming and going like a scouting party. He would rouse to demand a story about a woman in Gulltown and laugh at his own telling, then lapse into a place where only his breath did work, then come back to swear at a stone for tripping his men. The blood slowed, then oozed in new ways when the litter tilted. Ned walked beside the king and measured the world in steps and breaths because there were no other proper measures now. In the red, keep the servants made corridors where there had been none. The white cloaks arrived with that soft-footed speed that armor gives men who have carried it long and do not fight it anymore. Pycelle came flapping with a basin and a serenity that had been borrowed from someone sensible. He put his hands into the blood with professional piety and murmured things to his own fingers. The queen appeared at the bedchamber door with her green gown a flag of undisturbable rule and looked once at the wound, once at Ned, and then at the cup in Lancel's hands. Whatever she thought, she did not show it in words. Robert groaned at them all as if their faces were pieces in a dream he did not choose to interpret. When the king had been settled and the room made into a place where medicine pretended to exist, Cersei put a hand on Ned's arm as if it had always been hers. "We will do what is necessary," she said, and the smile that came with it was a practice toy she put aside at once. "We will do what is just," Ned said. She went away carrying her perfumes like law.
"Picelle bent, lift it, examined."
He sent a boy for plasters soaked in wine and for poppy, and for boiled linen, and for courage, which the boy could not fetch and the old man pretended not to notice. He fussed and clucked and arranged the king's flesh as if it were a wounded banquet. The room took on the smell of rot and herb and good intentions. When at last he looked up and declared the wound not mortal if peace and quiet were its companions, there were men present who would have declared the sun to be smaller than the moon if it would have meant that the night would forgive them for loving it. Robert woke fully with the kind of vigor that makes liars of maesters. He sat up, swore at the pain, swore again to make the first oath feel less lonely, and called for wine. "The boar," he demanded, the word a child's. "Where is the pig?" "In the kitchens by now," Pycelle said carefully. "Being dressed." "Who told them to dress it?" Robert bellowed, and then collapsed into laughter. "Roast it. I want to eat the bastard that tried to eat me." He looked around and found Ned with his eyes and let relief show like friendship's old coat. "Stark, you have a face on you like winter. See, I've things to say." He waved off Pycelle with a motion that had put men to flight in other halls. "Not you. Go count your leeches." He hesitated.
"No."
"Stay. I'll need a witness who can write and spell." Ned sat at the side of the bed. The room had quieted into the hum of concern and activity, which is a noise men never hear unless they think they are dying. Robert chewed on his lip, then spoke like a man who had been practicing something in his head and found the shape finally. "I was a fool," he said. "I've been a fool for years, no. Save your breath. I know it. I was a fool this morning to drink like a green boy on his first ride. I was a fool once to make a boy's war into a man's life. And I've been a fool in bed more times than I've been a fool with a sword, which is saying something. But I'll not be a fool now." His hand went to Ned's wrist and sat there heavily. "Right," he said. Pycelle had paper ready as if the gods had told him which hour would ask for it. He set quill to parchment with slowness meant to look like care. Ned spoke the words in a steady low voice, because men will follow steady voices even into graves. "I, Robert of the House Baratheon, first of my name." The king began, and the chamber held its breath as if each title were another bone laid upon a pyre. "King of the Undulls and the Roiner and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, do hereby command." He stopped, scowled, ignored his own pain long enough to sneer at it. "Do hereby command Eddard of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell, to serve as protector of the realm and regent until the rightful heir comes of age." He glanced up from beneath his brow like a bull from under a low gate. "Write it so," he said, sudden and sharp. "Rightful, not another damned word." Pycelle hesitated that half-breath that tells a story, then scratched with his quill, the ink thick and black as accusation. "And his grace's seal?" the maester murmured. His eyes slid sideways to Cersei, who had returned at some point, bringing with her a silence like frost. She stood with her hands folded before her, as if they held something delicate and poisonous between them. Robert pulled at the chain on his chest where a seal had hung when he had been given letters to sign sober. He had not worn it today. He swore almost cheerfully. "Use any damned stamp," he said. "Use a ring. Use my blood if it pleases you. I'll spit on it for ink if I must." He coughed and made a face at the copper taste that rose in his mouth, and then laughed because the body betrays kings like any man. "Don't let her," he began, and then he did not finish, because there are some words a husband does not speak while his wife stands 6 paces away and holds the room with her eyes. Ned read what had been written, and then he read it again because he knew by long practice that what is read twice is more likely to stand against a storm. He put his hand to the parchment, not in affection for it, but because paper will run if you do not put a palm on it. "I will serve as protector," he said. Robert nodded with a relief that looked like gratitude. And you'll fix it, he said. All of it. I meant to do it, and I was always too tired or too drunk or too me. He grinned. The grin sat wrong on his white face and then righted itself out of insult. You'll not spend us poor. You'll not let thieves eat us in daylight. You'll send Stannis to do the dull things and Renly to do the pretty things, and between the two of them and you there'll be a realm worth saving. He went softer. I loved her once, he said, and he wasn't speaking of Cersei. Say her name. Lyanna, Ned said. Robert murmured, and in that one syllable there was a gratitude too old to bear weight. He closed his eyes as if the lids were cool. I didn't know what to do with love, he said in a voice that would not have carried across a table, and then, stronger, bring me the boy, Joff. I'll make him hear me. Cersei's mouth hardened a fraction. He is resting, she said. He is very upset. Upset, Robert repeated, amused. We're all upset. Bring him. I've little time and less patience. She gave a small bow that did not include Ned and left without haste. When the door closed, the room relaxed a measure. Lancel stood very straight and tried to look like a pillar. Sandor snorted. Renly had the grace to be pale. Pycelle fussed with a cloth that had only minutes ago been expensive. Robert's hand on Ned's wrist tightened. Do it, he said with a little of his old command. If I die. You'll not die, Ned said, and the room thought its own thoughts about the decency of lies. If I die, Robert repeated. Keep the bitch in a cage. She'll gnaw through wood. That's all she knows. He let out his breath in a grunt and then took another because he was not finished. If I live, I will go to war with my own appetites. I swear it. I will do God's. What a thing to be promising at my age. He laughed, and the laugh beat its wings against the ceiling and fell back as a cough. The prince arrived before the humor left him entirely. Joffrey's hair caught the light and made the same promise it always did, to be admired if not loved. He looked at the bed, at the blood, at the men, at his mother, and arranged his face into a careful mask. Ned thought fleetingly that the boy arranged things often, as a child arranges toys in a line and then grows angry when someone touches them. The boy bowed, not deeply, and put his hand to his breast as if to remind himself where it was. My father, he said, and his voice had that hard note it had learned from someone unkind. I am told you are hurt. I am told, Robert mimicked in a delight that only just covered scorn. Come here, boy, faster. I've not the breath to wait for your ceremony. Joffrey came and stood at the side of the bed as if he had come to inspect a carp in a tank. Robert looked at him and seemed to search his features for something that had nothing to do with the wound. Do you ride to hunt and drink and roar? He asked, sudden. Do you take blows and give them back? Do you stand your ground when a boar comes for your guts? Joffrey managed not to blink. I will, he said. You won't, Robert said. You'll send other men. That's the way of it. No matter. He waved the boy away with a weary dismissal that cut deeper than a lash. Go. Leave men to speak. Take your mother. Go learn how to pretend to be sad. He raised his voice with effort. And if I die before you return, know that I have commanded Lord Stark to rule until the rightful heir comes of age. The words are there. Signed. You can read. He laughed softly. Maybe not. Cersei's nostrils flared. She put a hand at the small of the boy's back and turned him with the gentle insistence of a shepherd directing a prized but stupid ram. They left. When the door shut, it did so without noise, and that somehow made the room seem louder. You make enemies the way other men make children, Renly said in a tone that tried to be light and did not quite succeed. Robert's smile showed teeth. I make enemies because I tell truths when I am tired, he said. He reached again for wine and found that Pycelle's hand was there first. He drank because it was a habit he had not yet sworn off even in this mood. Send for the cook, he said, looking to no one and everyone. I mean to taste that pig. When the king slept again, it was a real sleep, the body's honest retreat. Ned stood for a long moment looking at him and could not be sure whether he loved or mourned more. He folded the parchment and sealed it with the imprint that could be forged by any competent ring. It was the words that mattered, not the wax. He left 2 of his men outside the door as if loyalty could be posted like sentries. As he walked the corridor, the air felt thinner. The city beyond the walls existed in the numb diligence of late afternoon. Laundry beating itself to a new cleanliness, men carrying sacks with the gait of beasts, a priest telling a bored crowd that their sufferings were being measured by gods who had never had chores. He took Jory and Tomard and went to the street of steel again because the mind goes back to the place where it first recognized a shape and asks to see it anew. Tobo Mott was in his shop with a piece of iron that was not iron and a temper in his face that said he did not care to be interrupted by nobility. He softened a measure when Ned spoke the boy's name. Gendry, Mott called, and the big lad came from the back with a hammer over his shoulder and a look that said he was prepared to be corrected by a master and by no one else. He stood as he had before, shoulders square, eyes direct. The bull's head helm sat on a bench behind him, ridiculous and fine, a thing a boy makes out of secret pride. "I will have him placed with a master in the city watch's armorers," Ned said, and watched the boy's face more than the master's. "He will be paid. He will be trained. He will be kept." It was a strange word to choose, and he knew it. Gendry looked at Mott and then at Ned and back again. "I do good work here," he said. His voice had deepened since the last time. Boys' voices do that. They learn to sit lower in the chest suddenly like a bird choosing a different branch. "You do," Mott said grudgingly. "You do, but you do not like orders. You will do better under men who will not flatter you for your gifts. They will break your pride and your shoulder both, and you will be a better smith for it." Gendry shrugged a shoulder that did not mind the pounding. "As you say, master." Ned put coin on the bench and thought of bastards and names. He thought of blue eyes, black hair, and the stubbornness that ran strong in veins like an old wine. He thought of what would happen to a boy whose face could be used in a quarrel among kings. He left with an unease that would not tell him its cause plainly, as if the mind were a boy at a door pretending it had not been whispering. When he returned to the keep, Varys appeared from a place he had not been invited and gave Ned a look that was not quite pity and not quite glee. "A dark day," he said in a voice smooth to velvet. "The king's humors are under assault." "The king will live," Ned said. "For a time," Varys murmured, because he could not help himself. "All men live for a time. A subtle man would prepare." He placed a hand upon his own breast and seemed to measure his pulse there. "I am told," he went on mildly, "that our Lady Stark has not yet reached Winterfell. Roads are treacherous these days." He glanced down, "and that the Lady Lisa sends letters to no purpose, as if words could replace act." "Say what you mean," Ned said, more tired than angry. Varys smiled fully. "The Queen will not let go of what she thinks is hers. You will not let go of what you think is right. The collision of those convictions is an event, Lord Stark, as a storm is an event. I bring my little boat to shore when I smell lightning. I wonder what you do." He bowed with grace that had in it no respect. "If you need anything, information, he's a hint of oil where old hinges shriek." "I need men who do their duty," Ned said. "Men do their duty to themselves," Varys said, "and call it duty to others if they are ashamed." He slipped away then, as if the castle had made a movable gap for him the way water makes a path around a rounded stone. Night sat upon the red keep like a cat on a roof, alert and indifferent. In her rooms, Cersei poured a cup of wine she did not drink and watched it for an hour while it did nothing. She had spoken to Lancel and said very little in the way one can say much to a boy who wants to be told he has done well. She had spoken to Pycelle and said not much that was new, and yet the old man had blinked and bobbed as if he were hearing a strange theology. She had sent a message to Ser Janoslynt, and he had sent a message back that said without shame that he remembered his friends. She had not spoken to Jaime because she did not need to. His mind moved in certain long grooves when it concerned her, and he enjoyed it. In the dark below, Arya Stark hunted cats because Syrio had told her to, and because hunting is hunting whether the quarry is fur or falsehood. She had learned the sound a cat's paw makes on stone from 20 paces. She had learned how to let her breath go so small that it offended no creature's pride. She had learned that men are cats too, creeping and fighting and stealing fish from one another's mouths. This night, chasing a tom with a battle-scarred ear into a stair that went down and down again. She went farther than the cat and farther than she meant to, into a place where the walls were damp and the air smelled as if the sea were breathing through bad teeth. She crouched behind a pile of unused bricks and listened because the air ahead had speech in it. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but desire and accident are cousins. "The small ripple has become a wave," said a voice that smiled as it spoke, and so sounded kinder than it should. The wolf was always more honest than the stag. The stag is honest only when it is bleeding. "I did not think the great little finger could be made so small," came the answer, thick with foreign music even where the words were Westerosi. "It seems the fat king has teeth after all when they are put to use for him. The teeth will be blunted by sweetmeats soon enough," said the first voice. "But the suddenness of it has shaken our careful clock. I do not enjoy disruptions not planned by me." "We are both creatures who pretend to love surprises," said the second. "We would not be disappointed if the king were to die of this wound. It would give us many opportunities," the first agreed mildly, "and many inconveniences. Stannis will write letters with truths coiled in them like adders. Renly will embroider crowns. The lion will try to swallow the wolf whole and may break teeth on old northern bone. In such company, a dragon's egg might grow warmer." Arya held her breath until it hurt. She scooted very slowly, the way a squire scoots a chair so a lord will not notice his hunger. The voices drew closer and then passed as if on a slow barge through a black canal. She caught a rustle of silk and the smell of something sweet and burnt. She did not move until her leg cramped like a fist. When she climbed back up, the cats had gone somewhere that did not require politics. She found Syrio in the yard and told him the parts of the thing she could tell without sounding as if she had been where a lady should not be. He listened as he always did, with a man's still body and a dancer's listening eyes. "When you hold knowledge," he said lightly, "remember it may be a sword that cuts the hand that holds it." "I'll tell father," she said, because she was her father's daughter when she was not otherwise occupied with speed. "You will do as you do," Syrio said. "Step here." He wrapped her ankle fondly with the practice blade. "Not there. There is death there." Ned listened to Arya when she came to him and spoke in a rush, and he did not scold her for the places her little feet had been. He felt the shape of the thing he already feared, forces arranging themselves as they always do, according to appetite, according to stories told in whispers in cellars. He thought of Stannis at Dragonstone and the letter he must send that would be half warning, half plea. He wrote in his own hand then, without summoning a scribe. "Robert is hurt. The time is shorter than we believed. The truth we have taken for a rumor must be spoken. Come with men you trust. Bring proof if you have it." He sealed it and put it into Tomard's hands, and said the words men have always said at castle gates: "Ride fast." At Dragonstone, Stannis sat with the Red Woman as the sea beat itself and did not change its mind. She spoke in images that men who are thirsty will drink, and he did not drink them, but he held the cup to his lip. When the raven came with Stark's letter and the words stood on the page in that unyielding northern script, he felt both vindicated and irritated by how slow other men were to catch what he had caught by the mere use of his eyes. He sent Davos to summon his captains, and Melisandre smiled in a way that made the word captains sound like cinders. "Truth is a sword," she said softly, "and a torch. But the hand that holds the torch must not fear being burned." "I have never feared being burned," Stannis said, and it was true in the way that men's assessments of themselves are true for a span of paces. "I fear stupidity." He looked to Davos. "Make ready the fury, and send those letters. If I am to play the pedant to a whole kingdom, I will do it loudly." Davos bowed and went. He did not tell his lord the small thing he always thought at those moments: that the sea did not lift its skirts for law or proof, and that ships obeyed weathers that do not read. In the king's chamber, the boar came roasted and gave up its fat like a guilty man. Robert ate with enjoyment that was the act of life itself, even where his flesh had been torn. Grease ran in his beard and dripped onto the sheet, and the flicker of annoyance in Pycelle's eyes made the king's appetite bigger, because spite can add a course to a meal. "This," he said, chewing, "this is what kings are for. To kill the pig and then eat the pig." He waved for more, then waved it away, then took it anyway. He laughed and winced and did not mind the wince. When he slept after, he slept the sleep that has in it the memory of feast. When he woke again, near dawn, he woke as old men wake for the first time to find a body that has not asked permission for what it has done in the night. Ned was there already, the chair drawn close, the light gray and soft. The king looked at him and smiled with a gratitude that might have embarrassed them both if either had been vanity's slave. "Will you forgive me?" he asked suddenly. "For what?" Ned said, "Because he would not let a man decide his own guilt in his presence." "For not being all the things I told you I would be," Robert said. "For making you bear weight I should never have put on you. For being a friend as men are friends when they are made to be kings, clumsy and inconstant and always in a hurry." He reached up and Ned took his hand, and the clasp was simple and unadorned by the years of crown and duty that had sat on them both. "Tell me we did something good," Robert said hoarsely. "Once." "We did," Ned said. "We brought the men home." "Not all," Robert said, and in his eyes were the ghosts whose names cannot be stopped from showing up when summoned. He breathed slowly and let himself loosen and let go the way a great knot lets go with a strange neatness once one finds the right end to pull. He slept. He did not wake again. The morning was bright. Men in the yard tested bowstrings and found them twang like truth. The sea's smell came in and mixed with tanneries and sweet rolls and horse ripeness. In the king's chamber the air had settled into the stillness that follows a great spend of breath. Pycelle arranged the sheet over the face and cried, carefully, tears that did not disrupt his grooming. Cersei stood at the foot of the bed and watched a figure under linen with a gaze that had no romance left in it. She put a cool hand to the cloth as if testing whether the damp had bled through. It had not. Joffrey looked at the shape and was shocked by the knowledge that he felt very little. He discovered, with a private satisfaction, that he could pretend convincingly. He could muster a tremble in the voice and a starch in the neck at once, and ladies would weep and knights would applaud in their hearts. He tried it out and saw that it worked. Ned walked from that room into a day that had been changed and found the castle altered by it in ways that had nothing to do with who breathed air. He went straight to the small council chamber and called them in by name. They came with faces arranged. Renly had sorrow but not grief. Varys had regret but not surprise. Pycelle had both, so much of both that either might have been a clever powder worked up for the occasion. The queen came last, with Joffrey and 2 white cloaks and a composure that made men on their way to their knees think of obedience as a comfortable position. "The king is dead," Ned said, and heard the flatness of it and allowed the flatness. He left a command. He placed the parchment on the table as if placing a trout upon a board for cleaning. Renly bowed his head. Varys closed his eyes with prayerful efficiency. Pycelle made the sign of the 7 and then opened his eyes to read. Cersei did not touch the parchment. She looked at Ned as if the paper were an insult he had intended. "The king," she said, "named me regent. We all heard him. The words he set his hand to name me protector of the realm," Ned said. He did not look at her as he spoke. He looked at the law he had brought with him because it was the only thing that could make the words true. "Until the rightful heir comes of age." Joffrey's mouth tightened. "I am the rightful heir," he said. "I am of age to rule." A boy took the throne. Aegon was younger. He glanced at the maester as if to pluck history from the air. Pycelle obligingly dipped his head. "It is so, your grace. In times of exigency." "There is no exigency that makes a bastard legitimate," Ned said quietly. The room changed temperature. Sandor shifted without moving. Renly's head came up. Varys's eyes opened wide, theatrically, and then politely narrowed as if to hide their theater. Cersei's green eyes stayed upon Ned's face. "That," she said softly, "is treason. That," Ned said, "is truth." Truth is what men with swords agree to call it, Cersei said and smiled. And in the smile was Jaime's look when he had a blade in hand and a knight before him who had earned admiration. Lord Stark, you think the law a tree. I have always thought it a vine. It grows upon what it must. She touched the boy's shoulder. Kneel to your king, my lords. Renly did not move. Varys made a show of fussing with his sleeve. Pycelle sank down like a sack finding the floor and called it piety. Behind Ned, Jory's hand hovered near steel not because he meant to use it, but because the nearness comforted him. Ned put his palm on the parchment and felt the grain of it and remembered exactly the pressure of Robert's hand when he had taken Ned's wrist last night, a weight both ordinary and kingly. The city watch, Ned said. We will call them and read the king's words in the hall, and the will of the law will be done. He turned his head to Jory. Fetch Lord Commander Slint, and Ser Barristan, and the hall steward. We will have the realm see what the king commanded. Cersei's lashes lowered and lifted. It was not a blink. It was an agreement with herself. Ser Barristan serves the crown, she said. As do we all. She put a hand lightly on Joffrey's hair, and he tolerated it because he had learned the usefulness of tolerating his mother's gestures when many eyes watched. We will meet the realm, she said. We will show them their king. The way she spoke the last word made it something other than what it ought to be, as if she had decided to define it anew. Ned left the chamber without looking back. In the corridor, Renly caught him by the elbow with hands that did not like to clutch. Go now, he said softly and urgently. Take the boy. Take Joffrey and his brother and sister. Put them in rooms with your men at the doors and read your paper after they are safely caged. You have seen her. She will not blink in the light. Do not give her the light. Take the queen's children, Ned said. He could not keep the distaste from his tone. It was distaste for the act's resemblance to theft, for its cruelty even if it were a necessary cruelty. And what then? Then you rule, Renly said with a candor that sat strangely on him. And you send for my brother that you think a god of rules, and you make a peace that looks like war until men convince themselves it is peace. Later you can be righteous. His green eyes glittered with a kind of desperation men sometimes disguise as charm. Now you must be quick. Ned looked at him and saw a boy who had once admired a brother and learned to admire himself instead because the first admiration did not pay out. He shook his arm free. There is no quickness that does not end in bloodshed if it begins in seizure, he said. Renly's mouth scaled itself into a smile and then refused to hold it. You are too good for this, he said, and made the words both compliment and condemnation. He left with the haste of a man who has told a hard truth and hopes to make up for it by action elsewhere. Ned sent men on errands that made him feel like a bailiff. To Stokeworth to tell that lady to bring her men to the city, to Longwaters to check the gates, to Ser Barristan to come to the hall swiftly. He sent for Slint, and when the commander of the gold cloaks came, in his black with gold trim and his face set as if he were sternness itself made flesh, Ned saw the little nervous tick at the jaw that betrays a man who has been spoken to behind a door by someone with richer cloth than he wears. My lord Hand, Slint said with the bravado of an actor upon the stage. You sent. I sent, Ned said. You will bring your men to the throne room. They will stand to either side, and they will keep the peace while the will of the late king is read and obeyed. You will do this without fear or favor. Is that understood? Sel. Wyante's eyes moved to the parchment as if the paper might answer for him. Understood, he said. He bowed. It was not deep. The gold cloaks serve the city. The city is served by law, Ned replied. Not by gold. Slint went away with his head at an angle that suggested he did not find the distinction interesting. Varys washed into the space he left. A risky play, he murmured. To trust the watch. I do not trust them, Ned said. I trust duty. He went past the eunuch before that soft face could rearrange itself into concern. Outside the hall the air was thick with bodies, the smell of crowds like a second skin. Word flies faster than ravens when it has meat on it. The lords and their ladies and those who thought themselves both had come to be present at a moment. The king would be shown. The queen would be seen. the hand would be measured. The commoners pressed where they could. A baker dusted flour from his sleeves onto the velvet of a lord from Crackclaw who was too preoccupied to notice. A page cried with the excitement of being in a place he would remember when he was 60, if he lived. In her own chamber, Sansa put on a gown the color of a wild rose and let Septa Mordain fuss with the fall of her hair and thought of her betrothal the way a girl thinks of a story being true at last. She had heard her father say the word bastard in a tone that had made her stomach turn, as if she had eaten too many sweets. It had been a word that did not belong to princes. She was certain there had been some mistake. She told herself Joffrey would be a king, and she would be his queen, and the Septa had told her that queens suffer and triumph both. She wanted the triumphs. She did not want the suffering, but she had learned that to be admirable one must accept certain pains the way a dancer accepts blisters. She looked at herself in the glass until the glass told her what she needed to see. Arya sharpened a wooden sword to a point it did not need and told herself that wood and bone were cousins. She did not want a hall. She wanted an alley with cats and truths. When Jory knocked, she did not make a good face. "Your father," Jory said gently, "asks that you stay near. Today is a day for being found if needed." Arya rolled her eyes and did not argue because the man had a kind smile and because disobedience tastes better when it is eaten on one's own time. She tucked the little blade at the small of her back where no Septa would think to look, because wooden toys are not sins until they break skin. In the throne room, light fell through stained glass and made the floor a quilt. The Targaryen dragons in the panes gave their colors to stones they had never meant to grace. The Iron Throne sat like a thing found and feared, its metal mouths open. Joffrey stood before it with his chin in the air and his lips pressed together in a brave line he had practiced. The queen to his left glittered with a restraint that flashed in every movement like hidden jewels. Ser Barristan stood very near, old and straight and troubled by the smell of too many perfumes. The gold cloaks came in with their boots loud, lined themselves as ordered, and Janos Slynt took his place with the confidence of a man who has decided to believe himself necessary. Ned walked down the hall with the parchment in his hand and the weight of the north between his shoulders like a cloak. The murmurs rose and bent around him and fell. He stopped at the foot of the throne and bowed because a man bows to a throne even if he believes the wrong head is above it. He spoke before anyone else could, because truth sometimes needs to move first. "The king," he said, and his voice carried, the rough music of it filling the high spaces, "made a command last night. He named me protector of the realm and regent until the rightful heir comes of age. It is written and sealed. We will do as the law says." He unrolled the parchment and began to read. Cersei let him finish. It was a mercy she granted for reasons of her own. When the last word had hung in the air like a strike of a bell, she smiled and the room learned the shape of its afternoon. "Tear it," she said. The word puzzled the first ranks as if they had misheard. "Your Grace," Pycelle said tremulously. "Tear it up," she said to Ned Stark, her voice almost gentle with contempt. "That scrap of paper has no power except the power men give it. Tear it and let us stop this foolish play." Ned did not move. "If it is foolish," he said, "then have no fear of it." She glanced at Slynt. It was a small move, but the man had been taught the cue when gold was in his glove. He lifted his hand. The gold cloaks along the right wall shifted. Swords came out in a clean, rehearsed whisper. Barristan's head turned, incredulous, as if he had heard someone claim that an old creed was now a fable. Sandor stepped into a space and became a piece of iron left on a hot day. "Seize him," Cersei said, and her voice was pleasant because she enjoyed practicing it. Jan's men, Ned's men, moved at the same moment, not toward Cersei but toward the queen's motion. It was a sound like hail beginning. Jory Drew cursed. Tomard shouted something that did not arrive at its end. The first strike in such places is always someone else's fault. This one belonged to the City Watch. Steele glanced and bit and refused to apologize. Barristan cried out in a grief that was not for himself and brought his sword up just in time to parry a blow that would have found the soft place beneath his left arm. The hound laughed, because laughter is a hard thing in him and fights come when it is brought up. Ned did not go for his sword until there was no choice. He moved with the deadly economy he had always had, that he did not boast about because it does not comfort men to be told the surgeon is skilled. He saw Slint's mouth forming an oath that would let him live with himself later. He saw Joffrey's wild eyes, already excited by cruelty, already learning how to look as if he were not. He saw Varys with his hands folded and an expression of polite alarm. He saw Cersei, perfect, at ease as in a chair by a fire while servants made her comfortable. "Hold!" Ned cried, but the word had already been thrown aside by larger noises. The fight within a crown's hall is always uglier than the fights in fields. Too many pillars, too much echo, too many witnesses who are brave only in memory. Jory went down, cut at the thigh so deep that his strength went out of him with his blood. He tried to rise and kicked like a man in a dream. Ser Barristan knocked a gold cloak from his feet with the flat and then took a cut for it in the meat of his shoulder and grimaced like a man biting a sour apple. Slint shouted for order, 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 and his men made disorder precisely, efficiently, as they had been paid to do. Ned took a blow on his forearm and felt the bright taste of it in his mouth. He gave back one clean strike that opened a man to the ribs and hated it because the man had been a guard in the yard just 3 mornings ago talking about his daughter's marriage. He was turning to find Jory when someone hit him from behind with the pommel of a sword in a way that told him the fellow had been trained to subdue, not to kill. He went to his knees as light did odd things, breaking into little squares like a mosaic. The parchment dropped from his fingers and slid under a boot. He heard Arya's name in his head, and Sansa's and Catelyn's, and then he heard a voice from very far away say, "Spare his life," in a tone that had not been meant for mercy but for delight later. The world came back in increments. He tasted iron and he smelled old dust and new fear. He found he was on the dais with 2 men holding him by the arms. He saw that Jory was not moving and that Tomard was moving badly and that Barristan had lowered his sword and stood now as if at attention at a funeral not his own. He saw Cersei step forward and place her hand on her son's shoulder and felt a cold that had nothing to do with wind. "Bend the knee," she said to Ned, not raising her voice. "Swear to the boy, and I will let your northern neck keep its head to carry back to your snows." Ned swayed and found his feet stubborn. "No," he said, and there was no pride in it, only the simple impossibility of the act. He looked at the boy, at Joffrey, and saw only a child taught by a mother to love the mirror. He looked at the white cloaks and saw confusion. He looked at Slint and saw a purse. He looked at Varys and saw patience. He looked at himself and saw his father holding a sword in a yard filled with winter light. "Then take him," Cersei said. "Put him in the black cells. A few days there and his knees may learn manners." They pulled him away. The hall breathed. Sansa screamed his name and the sound cut him worse than the blow had. Arya was nowhere and everywhere. He was absurdly grateful for both possibilities. As they dragged him down, his knee protested, and he thought of Bran and of little laughter in a tower where wind sings differently than in the south, and he thought of the direwolf whose eyes he had trusted too late, and he thought of the letter to Stannis that had left already and would arrive or would not, and he thought of Robert's hand on his wrist and the weight of it, and he thought, the pieces are in motion. He let his breath out with care, because breath is the last thing a man can control when he has been placed in the pit. In the black below, the damp welcomed him as an old acquaintance welcomes a man who never wrote, with a silent accounting of absences. Somewhere in that dark, a rat that had once looked at Peter Baelish now looked at Eddard Stark and saw only a man. He sat on the stone and felt the ache establish itself like a tenant. He pressed the back of his head to the wall and closed his eyes and thought of a god's wood that smelled of iron and snow and trust. He did not pray because prayers are for asking, and he had no petition that would not insult a god's economy. He let the cold come into him. He arranged his pain and his fear and his regret and set them in lines as neat as ledgers that some other hand would not betray. Above, the queen took her son's hand and they ascended. The throne caught the light and the dust and the lies and held them all with a generosity that was almost beautiful. The gold cloaks cleared blood with sawdust and pride. Varys went to his little birds with crumbs of new narrative. Janos Slint had a man send a note to his house that said to keep the fire lit and the good wine at hand. Ser Baristan stood with his mouth a hard line and his eyes a sorrow a man might drown in. In the Tower of the Hand, a girl with red hair looked out at the river and told herself that love must be proved by obedience. In a smaller chamber, a girl with tangled hair and a wooden sword took it in her small hand and felt its weight and told herself that there is a time to cut and a time to be smoke. In the Street of Steel, a boy hammered and did not know that he had become a prize. At Dragonstone, a lord drafted letters that called a queen a whore and a prince a bastard and told himself that the law would save him from the storm. In the Vale, a woman placed another candle in a row of candles and made of the flames an army she could command, and her son counted them and called them soldiers. In the Red Keep's narrowest places, the eunuch and the foreign fat man met once more, briefly, like two ships thrust into the same cove by contrary winds. "It goes well," Illyrio murmured. "It goes," Varys replied. "Well is a judgment for later men to make over cups we will not drink." He smiled like a man practicing sadness. "For now it goes as it must." "And the wolf?" Illyrio asked, his eyes small. "In chains," Varys said gently. "They fit less well than one might expect." "And the cubs?" Illyrio persisted. "The cubs will bite," Varys said with something like approval. "I have always admired wolves. They do not lie as much as men." He spread his hands. "And dragons?" "Dragons do not lie at all," Illyrio said. "They do not speak. They only burn." In the cell, Ned Stark let another hour go, then another, as if they were pieces of meat for a god who demanded steady offerings. He heard footsteps sometimes, and sometimes he heard nothing at all and found that the nothing had voices in it. He remembered Robert as a young man, the brightness of him, the way he took up space. He remembered the moment he had seen that brightness dim and how he had told himself it would flare again, and how men lie to themselves about friends not for their friends' sakes but to keep intact the shape of the world that made sense to them. He thought of the boar and the spear and the fat crack of wood surrendering. He thought of the way a boar runs on its own death and of the way men do too. When the door finally scraped, the torch's light came like a crude coin. The figure beyond it stood with a care he recognized even in silhouette. "Lord Stark," Varys said almost apologetically. "I bring water. You bring words," Ned said. "Bring them then." "I bring you a canvas," Varys replied, stepping nearer, and the heat of the flame made a small weather between them, "on which to paint your choices." He held out the dipper. Ned drank. The water tasted of the minerals and mouths it had known, and he had never been so grateful for such a taste. "You can save your daughters," Varys said then, simply. "You can do it with a word. I will bring you that word if you will trade me another." "Which word?" Ned asked, though he knew. "Confession," Varys said. "Treason. Lie if you like the word better." He opened his little hands. "Say that you lied when you said the boy is not the king. Say that you told falsehoods to grasp power. Say you are sorry for frightening the realm. Swear fealty to Joffrey. Smile. You will be sent to the wall. You will wear black and grow old if you are allowed. Your daughters will be safe." Ned thought of the snow on the wall, the honest hard labor, the good misery. He thought of Sansa's stitched roses and Arya's woodruff hands. He thought of Catelyn's eyes when she was angry and when she forgave. He thought of truth as a sword with two edges and of the hand that holds it. He thought of Stannis and the letters and the Red Woman and law and vine and tree. He thought of how much one lie might cost a realm and how many truths. "Do it," Varys said softly, as if placing a shawl on an old man's shoulders. "Be selfless. Men call that kind of lie honor when they tell their children later. Call it what you wish now. If you do not, she will take them. She will take them both and make of their lives a lesson in obedience." Ned closed his eyes and saw winter. He opened them and saw a small man with large information and a candle guttering and leaps of shadow like frightened dogs against the walls. He said nothing, and in his silence he began to see the shape of a sacrifice that was not the one he had always imagined he would make. He had thought he would die for a truth. He had not thought he would live for a lie. He had not thought the lie would have more courage in it than the truth. "Come back," he said at last. "Tomorrow, I will give you your word." He heard how tired his voice was and how it did not tremble. Varys inclined his head. "It costs me nothing to hope you choose mercy," he murmured. "I like to do things that cost me nothing. Some would say it is my chief virtue." He left the water firkin at Ned's side and went away with the light and the heat, and the dark stepped in again, comfortable as an old cloak when a man is cold. In the queen's rooms, Cersei sat with Joffrey and taught him lines to say, phrases stamped from cold metal. "You will say, 'The law is what the king speaks,'" she told him. "You will say, 'Mercy is for my lord father's memory and for the realm. Treason has no mercy.' You will keep your chin proud. You will look at the girl, at Sansa, and you will look as if you pity her. Men like to be charmed by cruel boys. It makes them feel brave." Joffrey drank it as if it were spiced wine. He asked for more. In a lesser tower, Sansa prayed with an earnestness that would have melted iron if iron cared. Arya looked at the stone and decided she would not pray to it. She would find a window that led to a roof that led to a wall that led to a horse. She did not know where the horse would take her, only that it would take her away from the honeyed words that made such thick darkness in the halls above. At Dragonstone, Melisandre looked into a brazier and told Stannis she saw an old wolf kneel and a young king lift a sword. She told him she saw a boy with a hammer in a city of dust and a girl with a sword of wood and a woman with tears, always tears. She told him the stag and the lion would devour each other and neither would be full. He listened, frowning, and decided which parts to call omens and which to call the babble of fire. He sealed his letters and sent them out like a brood of clutching birds. In the Vale, Lisa clutched her son to her and whispered that the bad men would not come up the mountain. She pictured, not for the first time, Peter's face as it had been in youth, all angles and defense, and felt something like bravery in her stomach that she could not place and did not trust. She wrote to no one. She waited, a talent of hers that had been well practiced into paralysis. And in a black cell where damp made its own theology, Eddard Stark learned a thing he had not known he could learn: to hate a lie less for itself than for the way it might save what must be saved. He sat and breathed, and counted the stones that his hand could reach in the dark, and told himself each one was a reason, and that reasons make roads, and that he would walk the one he chose with his head up. The river went on going. The city told itself the new tale as it tells all tales, seasoning it with envy and hunger, sweetening it with cruelty. The ravens flew as if paid. The sea licked Dragonstone and tasted salt and law. The forest where the boar's blood had soaked the ground grew quieter. The flies said their own mass. Somewhere distant and east the air shook to a dragon's name said in a whisper by a woman who did not yet know she had the right to speak it loudly. Somewhere north a great wall of ice forgot all kings and all papers and all boars and remembered only winter. And the tail clicked forward a notch, like a gear in a great hidden machine, each tooth engaging the next. The death of the little man who had made a city run on promises had not stilled it. The death of the big man who had made a realm run on appetite had not either. The machine loves nothing. It goes on. Men throw themselves into its teeth or hold shims against its cogs or grease it with words. It does not care. But sometimes, when a man stands in the right place with the right weight on his feet, the teeth slip. Sometimes, the story had left room for that still. The first night after the eunuch left, sleep came to Ned in brittle pains. He rested between them like a man hidden beneath thin ice, conscious of the cold above and the deeper cold below, waking when the dark shifted its weight and creaked. He dreamed in squares of old light. Winterfell's long hall, sunlight on snow lifted by the wind like sifted flour, his father's hand on his shoulder, Catelyn's face lit by a hearth with the children strewn near as if they were a kind of warmth the fire made. The dream snapped each time, he knew why. He had made a decision and it had not yet been asked of him in daylight. Decisions have a way of turning into a voice you will have to answer. In the morning, if it was morning, the black cells kept their own hours. He heard a step that was not the eunuch's. The jailer rattled his ring like a man coaxing sense out of old iron and slid the bolt with the deliberation of a priest with a reluctant god. A tall, raw-boned man stood with a torch under his jaw and a face worked by weather and miles. He looked at Ned with the up-and-down glance of a mule trader judging stock and then smiled with 3 yellow teeth and an easy sadness. "Lord Stark," he said as if they were in a yard, not in a hole. "Name of Yoren." "The Watch. The Watch," Ned echoed. The 2 words carried a clean smell into the cell that was not there. A smell of cold and duty and meat burned on sticks at the end of long days. Yoren put the torch into a niche and took out a skin. "Water," he said. "Real. Not the wash that drips down these stones and picks up a taste of rat." He watched while Ned drank. "I seen men think on death down here," he went on in the weary voice of one who prefers not to speak more than needed. "And men think on lies to keep from it, and I seen a smaller number think on their girls and boys. Figured you was the 3rd lot." "You're right," Ned said. Yoren nodded as if paid a fair price. "Then listen, I've errands south and north. South is done now for a bit. North is your road. You ain't going there today nor tomorrow, but there's things can be put in motion. I can take a child with me when I go. Or 2. They're always glad o' boys. They don't look so close at the small ones if they keep their heads down. I can turn a head o' hair into a boy's cap in the time it takes a man to piss." He scratched his cheek with a blackened fingernail. "You want that of me, I'll do it. I'll not ask who it is. Only that you set your will on it." Ned held the water with both hands as if it were a warm bird. The cell was close and the torch smoked. But for a moment he stood on windswept stone with a boy's hand in his, and that boy had Bran's face or John's or Rob's. No, not boys now. He thought of Arya, whose hands held a sword like a question, and Sansa, whose hands were meant for roses and rains and sometimes would be forced to hold other, harsher things. "Arya," he said. The name stayed steady between his teeth. "The smaller. Quick. She won't come to you willingly if she thinks you mean to put her into a dress." He surprised a laugh out of himself, quick and thin. "Tell her I said to do as you say without letting you see that she is doing it. She will understand that. She will think it a game and then she will make it a war." Yoren barked a little sound that might have been approval. "I'll find her. She's a small stringy one, always chasing cats and looking where folk wouldn't. I seen her. Kept me eye out soon as I heard you was down here. Figured you'd think o' that." He hooked his thumb behind the strap of the skin. "As for t'other, the redhead," he hesitated. "The Queen's got her eyes round that one like a hawk round a leveret." "I know," Ned said. He had known it since the day Sansa had smiled up at a prince who said beautiful, and had meant handsome, and had meant possession. "Sansa must stay. She can speak for me and for the North if the Queen allows it. She believes." He stopped. "There are lies men tell their children for the children's sakes and lies men tell themselves for theirs." He would not speak either. Yoren watched him across the small bright, and in his seeing there was that rare decency of men who work in harsh trades. They learn to look on misery without feeding from it. "I'll take the little one," he said. "I'll keep her hid with the lads I'm taking north. She'll not like the smell or the noise, but she'll eat, and she'll breathe free, and she'll see sky. If the wall's what comes of it, well, there's a hard clean there. Better end this." He gestured with the torch. "And if you make it where you promised yourself, you can have her back off of me before the snows set in for true." Ned set the skin down and felt the decision click into that part of him that made him a good commander, the place where orders are given without fuss and carried out. "Do it," he said. "Be careful." Yoren grinned brief and wolfish. "Careful is the only thing keeps me with a nose on my face." He took up the torch. "And Lord Stark, there's another thing. She'll be after getting the boy crowned quick, the Queen. They'll want to show a law while they cut its throat. If there's anything you can do to keep their knives out of your tall lass's belly, do it. Say words, even if they're the wrong ones." "I will," Ned said. The torch went, and the dark resumed its rightful place over men like a heavy cloak that could not be shrugged. In her solar, Cersei read the letter Renly had left. No apology in it, as she had expected, only a frankness that would have suited a man she could have used for longer than a game. Then she burned it, lest anyone mistake the neat hand for her equal. She sent for Sansa and took her hand and told her that she was beautiful when she wept. "You have a gentleness about the eyes that men will die to be forgiven by," she said, as if she were offering a lesson in music. "You must use it. Do not waste tears on the wrong places. There is a way to spend them that buys more than grief." Sansa tried to arrange her face into something wise. When Cersei bade her sit and write, she thought at first the queen wanted to hear some verse. The words the queen gave her were different, their syllables heavy as iron, cold as edicts. "Tell your brother to come and bend the knee," the queen said, pacing. "Tell him that if he does this, if he puts his pride aside, your father will be spared the worst. He will be sent to the wall. He will have his honorable black, and the north may keep its lord. Tell him if he does not, if he dares to rattle swords at his king, then the crown will take all that is owed it. The north will be reminded how the south punishes traitors." The quill scratched. Sansa's face did as it was told. Tears made little prisms on her lashes. She thought of a letter as a kind of song that a brother would hear and understand, and in that innocent error there was something like cruelty. She would discover it later and suffer for it. "Good girl," Cersei murmured when the wax cooled on the seal. "You may cry again now if you like. It helps the eyes." Sansa cried, because her heart needed no coaching. When she left, she clutched a small torn square of linen that had belonged to her father's shirt and told it what a good queen she would be, and the linen did nothing with the news. Renly's departure made a gap in the court like a tooth pulled in a grin. Men's tongues could not keep from finding the empty place. He went in the night with light armor and fast horses, with Ser Loras and a handful of men who knew the king's gate better than the men whom Janos Slynt had set at it. The gate opened with the quiet that large doors make when oil and coin have been applied beforehand. Loras's laugh was low and thrilled at the edge. "Another kind of tourney," he said when they were beyond the walls and in the country where olive trees turned their silver faces to the dark wind. Renly set his jaw and did not waste breath on quips. He rode as a man rides when he is ready to discover whether his life is only a collection of comfortable rooms or the kind of story men remember when the rooms are cold. At Dragonstone, Maester Cresson watched Stannis not sleep. He had seen sleeplessness sometimes on the island when the seas rose to chew at the docks. But those were honest nights earned by weather and work. Stannis's nights were of the mind, being ground between the millstones of duty and injury. Melisandre came and went, her steps soundless and her eyes too steady for the old man's comfort. The Red Woman's words were like heat to a man already fevered. When the first ravens went out with Stannis's letters, insult bound in law bound in certainty, Cresson told himself there must be a way to cool a fire that threatened to burn the very hearth. He heavy-handedly mixed a draught he should not have mixed, and in a few days a cup would be raised with 2 hands and one would fall. That end lay ahead like a stone you pretend not to see until your toe strikes it. For now, Cresson stood and shivered and told himself the island had never been so warm. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn sat with Peter's execution like a stone in her stomach and made of it a jewel in her memory, as some do when they are not allowed the proper grief of wives. She whispered his name as she put Robin to sleep and fashioned it into the kind of prayer that gods never answer, because what it asked was to change the past. News of a dwarf's victory in the Ares Skychamber had annoyed her at the time because it was ungainly. Now it seemed to her that everything in the south was a carnival and she only a spectator with her skirts held up clear of the mud. She leaned farther into isolation and called it prudence. The great September of Baelor rose white in the sun, the steps wide enough for the sins of a whole city to climb at once and pretend they were going to be forgiven at the top. It smelled of incense and old stone that remembered tears and of men's breath on days when the press became prayer. That morning, its doors stood open as if the seven themselves had decided to air the place out. Word had blown across the cobbles all dawn. The hand would speak. The king would show mercy. The queen would show sense. The realm would be set to rights by pageant. Crowds liked these stories. They pushed inward and upward in the crush of bodies that is both fellowship and danger. Sansa was brought in with 2 of the queen's ladies flanking her and made to stand where her face could be seen by every man with a daughter, a placement as careful as any jewel set by a royal goldsmith. She clasped her hands like a novice and kept her mouth firm with an effort that made her jaw ache. She told herself it would be a story she would tell later. How she had stood beneath the seven and had been good, and the gods had looked down and had rewarded goodness. She made her eyes wide so that the mothers below would think of their own girls and pray for her and thus lend her strength with their wanting. Arya had hair hacked short that morning with a knife that had known worse duties, and Yoren had rubbed a handful of dirt and oil into it until it lay in sullen, matted compliance. "Boy," he told her, and she'd made the name fit, hard in her chest. She had not cried. She had bitten the inside of her cheek until a copper taste came and had told herself it was blood she owed to Sirio, because the dancing master had told her once her feet must learn to drink pain. Yoren had put her in a place where faces are most forgettable, among the men who smelled of the road and the haylofts and the wall, and told her to keep her head down. She kept it down and saw through the lattice of arms and elbows and next the great steps and the bright shape of the queen and the boy. She saw a sword of ice that was not really there hitching the breath in men's throats. Jory was not there. Arya felt it like the absence of a tooth she could not keep her tongue from seeking. Ned came up the steps in good linen and old pain. They had given him clean cloth and left the bruises. He walked with dignity because that was what he had left to spend. The roar below stepped back, made a lane for silence. Men had come to be cleansed by proclamation. Ned could not give them that. He could only give them words, and he had made a choice about which words. Varys stood near, hands folded like a schoolboy. Pycelle sniffed as if he were smelling a soup to guess its ingredients. Janos Slint glowed with satisfaction he thought looked like duty. Ser Island Payne waited with his mouth always open to catch justice like a falling fruit, his face bearing no more expression than any head on a pike. The man's mutilation had made him into a mask that felt like a threat even when he moved not at all. Barristan stood just behind and to the left of the Boy King and looked as if he had endured a lifetime of such mornings and had not learned to be at peace with any of them. Cersei's eyes were green as disgusted summer. She held a ladle-like tension about the mouth, the kind that can switch to pity at command, and planned the moment when she would lift her hand and be merciful toward a man who had been inconvenient. She had coached her son. He wore a face he practiced in the mirror, a princely compassion enacted on skin too young. A hush the size of a city settled. Ned Stark lifted his head and found Sansa because some part of him always had, and found Arya because of the kind of love that sees through walls. He did not see her sharp little chin in the crowd, but he felt a weight in the world where she stood. He looked at the boy on the dais and ached for a truth he could no longer say. He breathed, and his breath went out and did not come back as a sigh, because sighs are for men who hope to be forgiven by themselves. "I am Eddard Stark," he said. His voice filled the high places the way a brook fills a hollow in winter, slow and inexorable. "I was the king's hand. I spoke words that were not true. In my pride and anger I accused the queen's son of being no true heir, to grasp power that was not mine. Elite, I betrayed my king's trust. For that I ask the mercy of the boy who sits his father's throne and the forgiveness of the gods." The sound that rose then was not cheer or jeer. It was that collective exhale a crowd makes when it has been given its line to recite and can recite it while believing in its own goodness. Sansa's knees almost failed her with relief. She turned her face up and wept the tears the queen had advised, and it felt like strength for once, to weep properly. The queen's smile made promises to the audience that the queen did not intend to keep or break yet. Varys inclined his head as if acknowledging the neatness of the scene. Barristan's shoulders loosened a fraction. Janos Slint peered at Cersei, then at the boy he had agreed to obey. "Mercy," Cersei said in a gentle, bright voice and lifted her hand like a woman blessing a garden in spring. "See, my son? The realm watches." Joffrey's lips went thin. He had not expected the power to feel like this. It itched. He wanted not the lesson they had given him, but a taste of something stronger. He wanted to show the faces looking at him that he could disturb them and make them keep watching anyway. He had spent a night rehearsing lines his mother had taught him, and now a different script came into his mouth, tasting sweeter. He lifted his chin, the movement small and enthroned. "My mother the queen asks that I show mercy," he said, and the hall balanced on the word like a boy on a fence. I will, he added, and Sansa sagged with it. And then he smiled the way boys smile when they have found a toy no one else is allowed. But the gods have no mercy for traitors. Ser Islan, bring me his head. He laughed, high and bright, because the horror he had planted flowered so well under so many eyes. The world stumbled. For an instant men looked at one another as if to ask whether the line had been misremembered. Cersei's face held shape and then could not. She turned, quick and furious, to her son as if she could revise the air that had left his mouth. No, she said, in a voice people had not heard from her, because denial was not her habit. But Joffrey was drunk on the sight of so much attention arranged for his word. The queen's fingers left pale marks on his sleeve where she gripped. He shook her off petulantly, and that small boy's gesture held more power than any sentence Maester Pycelle had ever read aloud about the rights of kings. Ser Islan, he said, sharply now as if impatient at thick servants. Do as I command. Ser Barristan stepped once forward, then stopped. He had served unfit kings and watched fit men die for them. He found the old sickness in him, the disgust that men like him can swallow day by day until it hollows them out and leaves only obedience. He looked to the queen in that float of time and saw in her eyes a promise of later. He looked to Lord Stark and saw a man on his feet who had chosen to be broken rather than to break the things he loved. He stood still as laws were broken in front of him, and the stillness made him old. Ned Stark looked at the boy and at his daughter, and at the other daughter he could feel like a small son at his back in some unknown place, and told himself that he had done a right thing by a wrong path, and that was a thing no gods would bother to distinguish. He heard the crowd surge, then falter. He heard a small sound that might have been the seven shifting. The sword came out of its sheath with that bright shiver that men always think means something. It is only steel telling you where it is. Ser Islan had no face to pity with. The headsman moved to his place in a ceremony as old as kings and went about his work with an efficiency that would have pleased Stannis Baratheon and destroyed all of Sansa's education at once. Yoren moved before the sword did. He had a hand on Arya's neck and his knife in the other, and the pressure was not cruel but could become cruelty in the instant it needed to. Don't look, he hissed. Look and you'll scream, boy. And then I can't carry you out of here alive. Arya's body fought the command out of instinct. The same instinct that makes men stare at fires and cliff edges. Yoren pushed her face into his old coat, which smelled of smoke and sweat and horses and the road and something older, a smell like rope and salt. She struggled twice, and then went soft, and her eyes filled with the brown of his cloak. The sword did what swords are for. The sound was not grand. It was wet. The crowd broke into 100 sounds, each a small private noise of horror or appetite. Sansa's cry was a bird that had flown long and been wounded mid-flight. It fell against the polished floor and lay there. The queen put a hand out that did nothing. Varys closed his eyes, but he had already seen the thing that would be told 100 ways by nightfall. Barristan turned his face aside as if the stain might be found on the wall and wiped away later. Arya bit the inside of her cheek again and tasted the copper that had become her talisman. Yoren's grip on her nape held her head down like the hand a mother cat uses on a kitten when danger is teaching. When he dragged her away, it was as if he were dragging a sack of grain. Small hard hands steadied her sometimes, because recruits are kind to one another when they can be, even in smell and noise like this. Keep low, he muttered in a stream. Keep quiet, boy, think of mud, be mud. If you're mud, nobody will pick you up to see what you are. On the dais, the queen's mouth became a line a seamstress might have drawn and stitched and then ripped out. Her son smiled as if he had done something that would set his name into songs. There was already a tune at the back of his throat. Ser Islan stepped back and stood as if carved. Janos Slynt breathed like a man who has just been told a difficult sum but believes he has got it right. The hall leaked its people out into the mid-afternoon like a punctured keg. Slowly, then with increasing speed, each man and woman carrying away a version of the scene light enough to shoulder. They took Sansa away. She did not feel the floor beneath her slippers and could not make the world answer her weeping. She had never been taught how to bear what cannot be borne. The queen told her she had been brave. Sansa took the compliment and put it nowhere. In the time it took the city to swallow the news and bring it up again in tavern and alley and bed, Yoren had Arya in the stink of the stables and then out to a wagon with a broken spring so. Uendi and boys with faces like dogs. One with a nose recently broken and eyes too bold. Another with a mouth that would not stop moving. A thin one with a limp and a blade he liked as if it were a person. Sit, Yoren told her. Keep your head down. Don't tell them your name, answer to Aerie. He cut another slice off her hair with that same calm brutality the world had just used on her father and felt his mouth twist. Sorry, he said after. The word came out seldom and honest. We ain't got a choice. She nodded because her throat could not be trusted. He threw a rough cloak over her shoulders and tossed a sack of old apples into her lap as if it were why she had been brought, and the boys looked interested in her only as far as the apples went. Outside, a horse snorted like a thing remembering freedom. Yoren climbed up and took the reins. The wagon jerked out into a city that had forgotten how to step lightly. That night, when the Sept's flagstones were hosed and the last gossips had traded away their freshest tears, the Red Keep breathed as if it had been running. Cersei stood before the small council and told them what they would think about the morning. Pycelle agreed before she spoke. The old man's head bobbed like a dandelion in a draft. Varys regretted the lack of mercy with such sincerity it could be used again later when the queen needed a man who had told her she was wrong without making a bruise. Janos Slynt stood large and serious and asked for a new pay chest for the watch because of the... He groped for a noble word, disturbances. Double it, Cersei said, as if flinging a bone to a kennel. Slynt bowed and thought of a seat he had looked at longingly near a hearth in a better house, and how his wife's hands would look with rings on them. The queen's eyes slid to Ser Barristan, who stood apart with the unshiny poise of an old blade that remembers better smiths. Ser, she said, you served my husband when he was unkingly. Serve my son when he is young. I serve the crown, Barristan said, and the words tasted like ash. But the words were the ones his mouth had been taught. Good, Cersei said. You may begin domain by riding the boy through the city. King should be seen. His mercy today, she smiled with exquisite faint contempt, was misunderstood by some. We will correct the tale. Varys's lashes lowered. Shall I begin? He tasted the pause as if choosing spices. Conversations with the faith, your grace? The High Septon liked the morning less than is healthy for him. His sermons can be educational. Begin, Cersei said. Let the words move ahead of us and say the things I cannot be made to say, but that must be said. She stood. The audience was done. And someone clear the Tower of the Hand. It stinks of north. In the Tower of the Hand, the stink was leather and men's laughter that would never be made again, and a wooden wolf carved into the handrail by a man who had been homesick and had not liked to say so. They took it all. The servants did it with embarrassment because they had liked the stillness the hand had brought to the place. The queen's men did it with cheerful malice, because malice had been rewarded very well today. Far to the north, the ravens reached Winterfell before the weeping they carried did. Robb Stark took the news on his feet, because he had always been a boy who stood to hear what men had to say. He was not a boy then, all at once. The letter was Tully read and Tully neat, from Lord Hoster's hand with his daughter's grief beneath it like water under thin ice. Robb's face went white and then settled back into something that would be called grim by men who do not know better words. He put the letter down and went out into the yard with so much absence in his eyes that men stepped out of his way and thought of their own fathers. Grey wind found him with no confusion. The great wolf came to his side as if the shape of Robb's wounded silence had called him, and leaned a heavy head against the boy's hip. Robb put his hand into the rough fur without looking and found there a steadiness that words do not teach. He stood very still. Winterfell was full of noises, hammers, voices, a woman telling a child to mind the step, the rising boil of a kitchen. But around him there came a pocket where sound could not stay long. When he turned at last, he was a commander. Grief had been put away in a room where he could open the door later and take it out and look at it properly. Call the banners, he told Hallis Mullen, who had so often told him to square his shoulders as a boy. Every man from the last hearth to the white knife. Send to Torrens Square, to Barrowton, to the Rills, to every holdfast that ever called a Stark lord. We ride to Riverrun. The river, Theon Greyjoy said pleasantly, as if ensuring he understood the word rather than admitting that he had never imagined himself riding to save a Tully. Aye. He grinned a grin that showed too many teeth when he thought of Lannister throats and his bowstring singing. He was suddenly full of the possibility that something worthy might at last be asked of him. He clapped Robb's shoulder harder than he should have and was forgiven. The Great John was the first to come under the direwolf banner and the first to shout at the boy. He was drunk with fury and good wine both. You mean to lead? He demanded, bared his belly with a laugh, and reached for Robb like a man testing a horse's mouth to see which way it will run. Grey Wind took the man's hand in his mouth and squeezed until the laughter fled and the Greatjon's sense arrived on foot. Blood made a quick, honest line. He jerked back, looked at the wolf, then at the boy, and threw his head back to laugh differently. King, he said, but softly, not to be heard yet by anyone who would put the word into a book. There's a king in you yet. The wolf let go. The Great John flexed his hand and decided to be amused by the scar it would make. Men who are pleased by their own narrow survivals are easy to rally to a banner. They moved. Catelyn rode with a company out of the Vale that was no company at all. Just a rich woman with skill at asking and a memory for the gratitude of minor lords, and reached the Riverlands under a sky that could not decide between weather. She found Riverrun wrapped in trouble like a wound in bandage. Jaime had swept through it cleanly, and Edmure, she was told, had gone down with bravado and an arrow in him like an ugly ornament. Her father's breath was a shallow sea upon which she placed her love like a light boat, and waited for it to find a shore. She took command of the quiet small tasks that women take command of when war comes. Food, bandages, letters. She did not let herself think of Ned's neck except when she had emptied a bucket, and there was a moment of stillness between the things she could do and the things she could not. Then she let the picture come, and hated the world with the fierce uselessness that keeps certain mothers alive longer than sense. Tyrion Lannister learned of Robert's death and Eddard Stark's with a mug of bitter in his hand and a mountain wind busy in his hair. The clansmen around him celebrated any news that contained the word kill. It was their theology. He sat with Shagga and Khan and the others and thought about the shape of a city without Peter Baelish. He had never liked the man. That was the point of men like Peter. Their usefulness did not lie in being liked but in the fact that liking was always beside the point to them. He imagined the Queen's fingers on the strings Baelish had once plucked and wondered if she had the same ear for discord. He sipped and thought of his father, who had never been surprised by anything except stupidity in his own bloodline. The thought made him smile without joy. "Come," he told Bronn when the mug was empty. "We'll see what songs the old man is paying for." Tywin Lannister had made a desk for himself in the ruined greatness of Harrenhal, a joke too large not to sit in. He took reports in a room where the stones sweated and the air tasted faintly of old ash and old lightning. News came and did not discompose him. He put it in its proper place as a mason puts stones. He had expected some of it. The rest pleased him because he liked proof that other men's imaginations were smaller than his. When Tyrion came with his mountain men like a painter arriving with his badly behaved models, Tywin raised a brow and made that the extent of welcome. "You will go to King's Landing," Tywin said, after he had said the requisite words about fathers and sons and pride and disappointment. "You will be my hand, mine, if not the king's. You will set that nest of lapwings in order." He did not say that he had lost a useful spiderling in Peter Baelish. He did not confess that he had once paid attention to the lad because the boy had indulged the family's appetites for coin cleverly. He said instead, "Your sister has done what she thinks necessary. She often does. Your task is to do what is needed. And if the two differ," Tyrion said mildly, "then you will make her think what is needed is necessary." Tywin's mouth made a line that lazy men mistake for humor. "Take men with you, men who obey you. I am grateful to your hill friends. I am not eager to seat them at court." Tyrion looked at Shagga, who was picking his teeth with a bit of Harrenhal's old splendor, and judged. "I'll take enough to be loud," he said. not enough to be farcical. He thought of the queen's face when she saw him come like a footnote with men in leather and smiles. He did not let the thought animate his expression. Stannis's letters went, black-winged and sure, to every corner of the realm that had ever cared about who climbed into which bed. They were read aloud with varying degrees of horror and relish. Men who loved law admired the clarity even when they loathed the consequence. Men who loved power admired the strike even when they feared the blow. In King's Landing, the word bastard began to find its way into mouths that had been careful before, and men learned to say it without letting their lips form the whole vulgarity. In taverns, men made jokes that killed time until trouble arrived to kill other things. In the Red Keep, Cersei smiled and ordered more wagons of gold to be brought up the river because gold is a language that stills conversation. Sansa lived in a careful haze. She moved through the rooms handed to her as one moves through a dream that one has decided to be grateful for despite its monsters. The queen spoke to her softly. Septa Mordane was gone. She had been taken and Sansa had not learned how not to look away in time, and in that absence the queen's ladies became a softness that had needles in it. Sansa attended a supper where men laughed too loudly and said the name Stark with foil in it. She kept her face as it ought to be kept and thought of a song she had once loved about spring and melted snow. At night she changed into a child again and called her father's name, and sometimes she remembered at the last moment not to do it aloud. Arya learned to sleep among strangers who did not ask her questions. She learned to hold a crust of bread in her cheek so it would last longer and to move like shadow when Yoren told her to, and to keep the little point at her back even when she had to lie on it. She did not say prayers because she could not find the words that would not be broken by the jolt of the wagon. She kept her eyes on the road when they were on the road and her ears on the breathing around her when they were in a barn. Once, 2 of the boys fought and she watched with a detached attention that was new to her. She would have joined a week ago to prove something to herself about strength. Now she thought of Sirio's hands and of the way he had said, "Not today." And she counted the times men say words as if they cast spells at the world and the world answers by killing someone. Beyond the narrow sea, Dothraki grass hissed and bent and rose again under hooves. Daenerys Targaryen felt the child shift within and told it softly that the world was large and that it was loved. She did not tell it about kings wearing other men's names. She did not yet know that the man who had sent a killer to a wine stall had died, and that a new game had begun in which she was again a piece. She rode with Drogo and saw the way his wound leaked and knew, the way women know, that the wound had taught the Khal something about his flesh that none of his victories had. She did not call it fear. She did not call it anything. She watched, somewhere far behind them, a letter about incest winged over water and was mocked in a Tyroshi counting house and called truth in a Pentoshi manse and made a Lysine courtesan laugh because the word had been old currency even there. It changed nothing in Essos. It changed everything in Westeros and not at all in the ways men wanted. The river ran fuller. Robb crossed the neck with banners enough to look like a real war. At Moat Cailin he learned how men put weight into old stones and how old stones give it back. The Crannogmen came with quiet knowledge of paths that do not appear unless a certain foot finds them. The boy learned to listen to men whose faces carried as much swamp as human expression and to trust a frog spear as he would trust a lord's oath. He learned to sleep on damp and call it learning. Theon laughed and flirted and shot geese for supper and told himself he was blazing like a coin in a man's hand. At night he thought of Pike and was oppressed by a pride that had not been earned and a shame that had. At the twins, Walder Frey remembered the taste of imaginary slights with the relish of a man chewing over hard-toothed meat and kept Robb waiting long enough for a young lord to feel he had been insulted. Catelyn did what she had always done best when men puffed themselves up. She took her needle of courtesy and pricked the bubble without making the man bleed. Frey agreed to what he had already decided to agree to. He extracted promises his descendants would later lay like straw in a dry barn. The bridge took the weight of an army as if bridges had always lived to be betrayed. In King's Landing, Jaime Lannister did not yet find himself cast off. That would come. For now, he watched his sister play at rule and thought she did it with skill and anger both, and that either would be enough if the gods were careful. He missed the swift clarity of battle. He had to make do with the slow, satisfying cruelty of watching men flatter. He found himself practicing patience and was irritated to discover he was good at it. He went sometimes to the sept and stood before the stranger and told it that he had known it too long to respect it. The stranger said nothing, and neither did Jaime. It felt like companionship. Tyrion rode toward the city at the head of a ridiculous wedge of riders who looked everywhere but where he pointed them. He spoke with Bronn at night with easy rudeness, and on the third night the Sellsword told him a story about a woman who had taken coin from him and given him a lie, and the tone in Bronn's voice made Tyrion like him a little more. "We'll tidy the place up," Tyrion said, thinking of King's Landing as a hearth with ashes thick in it. "We'll sweep, we'll beat the rugs, we'll shake the cushions, we'll find out which scorpions jump onto the floor. Then we'll put the chairs back." Bronn grunted, as if the plan contained enough stabbing to be useful. Cersei met her grandchildren of rumor with her usual economy. She killed some and bred others. She sent to Casterly Rock and had more gold brought east because gold was the only story she believed all men would settle for. She awarded Janos Slynt a lordship. The City Watch had done ugly work on her word, and she knew how to feed dogs who had eaten meat she had pointed at. She danced lightly around the High Lords and shored up the small ones with treats. She made pyres of letters Stannis sent because burning letters allowed her to feel she had changed the fire into something that obeyed her. Joffrey built a habit of cruelty in little pieces because it pleased him, and because men watching him pretended to be pleased, and the pretense burrowed back into his bones and convinced him it was appetite. He liked the bow that made a reverent little noise when he drew it. He liked the sound he had learned a sword makes on a neck. He liked saying no to his mother in minor matters and making her indulge him afterward to keep the larger obedience. He learned the taste of power as other boys learn wine. Too much at first, and then nothing else will satisfy. In the north, the tale men had whispered for generations in jokes in their halls, about a crown that fit a stark head, got fitted with names and dates. It took place in a fish-scented great hall washed by a river that did not respect walls. They were the lords of the old blood and the new, some with honest dirt on their boots, some with only a faded memory of it. They had come to see a boy and found a man who did not thump his chest and therefore could be trusted to put a spear into others' chests when necessary. The Great John, as was his privilege, bellowed what the quieter men had wished to say. "Why do we fetch a Southron king to tell us when to eat?" he roared. "We had kings in the north when the Undulls was beaten their iron flat to make pots." Wyman Manderly nodded, calculating, and said he could bake that. Galbart Glover and Ricard Karstark and men whose names sit on the maps like knots in would bang table and knee and sword. "The king in the north!" someone shouted. Perhaps the Great John, perhaps the river itself. The words came again, truer the second time because the first had taught their mouths the shape. Robb accepted it with more stillness than joy. Catelyn watched with pride and with the sorrow a mother feels whose son has stepped off a stair she cannot follow, onto a landing that will hold him or not hold him as other men decide. Yoren's company took the King's Road north in jerks and lunges. They slept in crofts and under wagons, and once in a burned hamlet where the stones still remembered heat. Arya discovered that grief becomes a routine the way eating does. In the mornings, she woke and for a heartbeat did not know where she was, and then remembered and put the weight on as one puts on an arm guard. At noon she ate what was handed and tried not to think of lemon cakes. At night she listened to the boys snore and told herself a list of names that had become bedtime and spell. Joffrey, Cersei, Eileen, Slynt, the Hound. And when she slept she dreamed of running down a hall with a sword that lengthened in her hands until she could not lift it. Sometimes she dreamed of being small enough to become smoke and float into a guard's nose and choke him. Gendry kept to himself in the beginning. He pushed the wagon when it stuck and lifted the corner when a wheel needed to be wedged. He watched the little boy with the two quick eyes and the stubborn jaw and did not think much of it. Once, when a hedge rustled wrong and a man with an old spear thought he saw small folk worth robbing, Gendry moved without thinking and his hammer caught the spear's path the way a smith's son knows how to catch things, by finding the right angle for the metal to lose interest in its original direction. The man ran. Yoren spat and told Gendry he was a good lad. Arya looked up at Gendry as if looking up a small well and thought, for the first time since the Sept, of safety without her father. It scared her and she looked away. At Harrenhal, Tywin breathed though his mouth because the place stank of defeats he had not suffered. He read letters, he wrote letters, he sent men to burn other men's granaries and to drag girls into camps because cruelty applied properly. Avies U 3 campaigns later, he heard that the boy Rob had won a skirmish in a wood, and he told the man who brought him the news that it was not a skirmish when the enemy stops living. He sent the mountain where the boy had not yet arrived. He sharpened the family name against the north as if it were flint. When word came to him that Stannis had written a certain word about a certain boy, he let out his breath and said nothing. Some truths are uglier than lies, not because of what they mean but because of who says them. At Dragonstone, Maester Cressen's cup tipped and 2 people drank. One of them died and the other burned with a light that had no grace in it. Davos watched Stannis take the death with a face that moved less than the sea. He watched Melisandre stand beside his lord with the confidence of one who believes the world has decided to become the story she carries. He didn't like what he saw and liked less the part of himself that had begun to understand how men mistake certainty for wisdom. He went out onto the seawall and looked at the surf and shivered for reason and for lack of it. In King's Landing, the day Tyrion arrived had dust in it. His horse was not the finest. His men were not the handsomest. His smile was not the kind that makes fools swagger. He came into the throne room with a tired insolence that was its own kind of power. He was small and had learned to make smallness into a place where contempt slides off. Cersei regarded him like a knife of poor steel. It was still a knife. Joffrey scowled because it was habit now. The small council rearranged themselves like vegetables around a roast, each hoping not to look like the least important thing on the board. Tyrion read the room with the skill of a man who has frequented poor inns and expensive brothels. He told his nephew he looked well. He told his sister she looked tired. He told Varys he looked happy and thus that the city must be in a state. The eunuch smiled with a grace that made men want to slap him. "I am here to relieve you of burdens," Tyrion said to the queen, "and to increase them in directions that please me." Cersei said she was happy for neither and smiled with a ferocity too fine for the blunt to see. They began their work. Sansa came to court as a ghost in a rose-colored gown and learned to look at men as if she were listening to them while her mind went away to a place that still held red leaves and old walls. Joffrey performed petty cruelties for her attention and was offended when she did not praise them. Cersei told her to praise them and she tried. The praise sounded like a poor copy of A Better Lady and Cersei made a note in the ledger she kept of satisfactions. The Hound watched the girl and snarled at anyone who used the word pretty in a voice that had been taught to him by men who had enjoyed his scar. The Hound did not know what he wanted to protect in the girl. He did it anyway, because sometimes men find their own eyes in other faces and it shames them into gentleness. Arya learned the names of roads the way a thief learns the weight of pockets. She learned that kindness from strangers is a kind of confession and should be treated carefully. She learned that Yoren was a better shield than walls are when men wish to trample other men into gravel. When they were halted once outside a village that had been stripped to the bone by a foraging party wearing colors that looked like lions rolled in mud, Arya heard a sound from the hedge that made her spine come up. She crawled like a ferret and found a child not much younger than Bran had been before the fall, dirt-caked and stiff with fear. Yoren had the boy out and to the wagon before the riders bothered to see how many heads were under that tarp. It grew crowded. It grew noisy. It grew human. That night Arya slept thinking about the quick deciding that kept people alive, and she decided to become quicker. Robb won and then won again, and men began to remember that the North can fight with silence. They began to tell stories of a wolf larger than a pony that bit a lord's fingers off and made him laugh. Men need stories about wild things laughing in the face of discipline. Jaime Lannister's sheen grew dull in the telling along the Green Fork. He became what men wanted him to be: too quick to kill, too slow to learn. He was taken with a neatness that would have shamed him if he had cared for shame. Robb looked at the Kingslayer as a boy looks at a stag he has finally brought down, and felt the dissonance of seeing a story turn into a man's breath fogging in the cold. He ordered bonds and courtesy both, because his mother's lessons had not been erased by the night he had taken a crown from other men's mouths. Catelyn looked at Jaime and saw what all women with sense see in a beautiful enemy: the waist under the polish. She spoke to him and he answered with the smoothness that had been raised on the milk of the Red Keep. She told him about the way boys make war and men pay for it. He told her what he had done to kings and what he wished to do to others. They did not convince one another of anything. Later, when she would make a decision that would loose wolves and lions again and make Bard sweat, she would think of those conversations and hate herself for being the only one in the hall who still believed that men's lives could be bargained for like grain. In King's Landing, the smell of smoke began to share the air with the smell of fruit rotting in the gutters. Tyrion elevated and dismissed men, played with the coin and found it sticky, pushed Cersei where he could and slid where he could not. He went to see Janos Slynt in his new lord's seat with its new coat of arms formed from old favors, and he smiled gently. "There are small men and large chairs," he said. "The trick is not to look ridiculous." Slynt found that hot wine burned the mouth differently when the man across the table would rather watch you choke than listen to you talk. The gold cloaks learned a new habit. They looked to the hand's orders and then to a smaller man's glance. There are revolutions vast and revolutions that are only adjustments. The city prefers the latter if the bread keeps coming. Sansa walked to the sept sometimes when it was allowed and made the signs she had been taught. Once she found herself kneeling next to a woman whose hands were so calloused they were like old leather and whose hair had been devoured by grief. The woman looked at her and said nothing. Sansa folded her hands tighter and found that sometimes prayer is only a way to keep the hands from shaking in public. She returned to her rooms and practiced smiles in the glass. They all looked like girls who had lost their fathers. On the King's Road, the smell of ash followed them for a day. Yoren knew it. He had smelled such days too many times. The men who thought they owned the ash came in the early afternoon and longed for their own advantage like men long for cool water in heat. They wore colors on their sleeves that meant nothing. Browns, a shred of a check here and there. They had learned to peel whatever colors they found from whatever they had burned. Yoren saw them and spat once and swore and told the boys to get under the wagons, and told Gendry to stay with them because he would, damn him, want to put his hammer through a skull and die for it. Arya stayed not under the wagon but under the memory of Sirio's voice and watched for the step that is not careful enough. Yoren took one of the men in the neck before the other had noticed, then swore like a father with foolish children and went down with a spear in him. He cursed the spear not for being in him but for being a poor spear that bit unevenly. Men make jokes at certain hours to keep their guts from melting. Yoren's last joke was that, and it comforted no one. They ran. They hid. They were taken, some. They learned words like Harrenhal with new meanings. The world that Arya Stark had once thought was a story taught to a girl in a castle from a safe stool turned into a map that bit her feet and stained her hands. She let the boy's name Aery fit better. The list of names at night grew longer by one. The man with the tick under his eye who took Yoren's last coin from his pocket after the man had stopped needing coin. Arya said the name without a voice. She made a promise without an altar. In King's Landing, Sansa learned about standing on a parapet with the wind trying to steal her hair away, and the boy she was betrothed to trying to steal away what she called her hope. Joffrey showed her her father's head at the end of a day that had already been full of things she could not carry. He asked her if she wanted a kiss. She said she wanted to go home. He laughed, and his laughter had already learned how to tighten other people's throats. The hound stood nearby and had to hold his hands still because he found that they had begun to want to act on his behalf, which was not how he had trained them. Tyrion set a stool in the small council chamber and sat on it as if it were a throne and told men taller than him to sit or stand as he preferred. He sent one cousin away and called another up and wrote a letter to his father that made him laugh and then balanced a budget with a malice that Peter Baelish would have admired. He trimmed bribes while increasing them. He simplified theft by requiring that it be called stipend. He spoke to Shay in a voice he had not known he possessed, gentle for his own sake rather than hers, and found the city looked different at night when a woman's ear is the only one that catches your jokes. Across the seas, Drogo's wound fouled. Dany's voice deepened into a command that frightened even her. She brought a god's wife and thought she had brought a midwife for one kind of birth. She found that births can be made of fire and ash as well as water and blood. The lamb woman caught wind of the South's letters eventually. Truths cast eastward on slow ships, and laughed because men will always rape and lie and call it policy. The laughter did not save her. It costs nothing to laugh. It costs much to stand when knives come out. In the Riverlands, Robb made Jaime his hostage and let the men around him taste the power of that word. He treated the Kingslayer well because Catelyn told him to, and because he recognized that men are stories in other men's mouths, and he would have this one told right, with restraint and iron and a direwolf at the Kingslayer's door most nights. He let Theon boast and laughed sometimes the way men must if they will not hang one another. He learned to sleep in armor and the art of maps. He learned the look of men deciding whether to die for him. He learned that the answer is usually yes at the beginning and then complicated as the nights get colder. In King's Landing, Stannis's letters turned from shock into furniture. They were in the room with you now when you spoke. You had to lean around them to reach the wine. The faith said some things about bastards and tears and duty and the way the gods sort bloodlines. The small folk said more direct things. Cersei kept her chin as if it held the castle up. Joffrey shot a peasant to see what sound he would make and learned it was not very interesting after the first one. Sansa turned away and into herself. The Hound took a step toward the boy and then made himself stop because an old oath lay on him that had nothing to do with kings. Arya saw Harrenhal for the first time as a child sees a nightmare. The walls had been melted by a dragon once and never forgot it. They wept black and the weeping never dried. She learned the names of men who liked to hurt other men more than they liked to breathe. She learned that girls can be made boys and then made nothing, and that she could not afford to let the word girl float off her tongue even in sleep. She met a man in a cage with two other men, and one of those men smelled of old death. She spoke words that mattered because they had been asked for carefully by a voice unlike other voices. She found a coin that would weigh her future. She made bargains with gods she did not choose to believe in. She learned to whisper Vala Morgulis without knowing how to spell it. Sansa learned to sleep with her back to the wall and her feet pointed toward a door. The Hound taught her to drink wine the way men drink it when they wish not to be drunk too quickly. He did it by drinking himself and then snarling at her when she imitated him wrong. "If you'll do a thing, little bird," he said, "do it so it don't look like a thing you learned yesterday." He took her hand once and saw how small it was in his and swore at it and then went away. Later, when fire became not only a word but a sky, she would remember the smell of him, horse, steel, sour wine, old smoke, and think of safety with confusion and fury both. Cersei arranged feasts and found that feasts were not enough. She arranged executions and found that executions clogged the drains and fed flies. She tried to play the game with a hand that had lost 3 good cards. She did not forgive the man who had published the missing cards. She dreamed of her father the way girls dream of hero lovers, arriving with banners and law and a book of ways to circumvent both. She woke angry that she had needed the dream at all. Tyrion built a chain. He did it with the industrious malice of a clever child left alone with lie. He menaced Pycelle into forgetting how to be a man and reduced him to the robe he had always been. He tried to put the city into a state of readiness. He sent Myrcella away because innocence fares better on a ship than in a siege. He found himself praying, in the dry, antic way a man like him prays, to chance, to chaos, to sturdy doors and men who have never had the sense to be frightened when they should. The north weathered itself toward winter. Catelyn spoke to a woman named Brienne, and found comfort she had not expected in a girl who had not been taught the small lies women used to stay alive. Brienne loved her king with a purity that would shame men who have histories. Catelyn accepted the service because she could not afford not to, and because something about the tall girl's candid pain made her feel less alone. She tried not to mother Brienne and failed sometimes because habits of love are stronger than royal decrees. In the Far East, a pyre burned and 3 things that would change story into myth crawled out of eggs that had never meant to be more than jewels. Men who pretend to be brave felt the hair on their arms rise. Men who pretend to love gods felt their hearts lurch and pretended it was devotion. Dany's mouth shaped a name that had not been spoken in the world with truth for centuries. The flames answered back with the only language they have. It was not Westeros's concern yet. It would become so. For now, the wind in the Dothraki Sea took up her voice and braided it into grasses the way girls' hands do with hair. Back in the city that had eaten her father, Arya turned a name into a dead man. The first was easy because the man had made it easy by making her list so long. The second was harder. She learned that vengeance is labor more often than it is spectacle. That knowledge made her older than her years in ways that could not be mended by songs when she reached safety later, if later came. She learned to run with her feet silent and her eyes looking always for the next thing that would collapse upon her. She learned to squeeze between walls designed to keep out men with armor. She learned to eat what had not been meant for her. She kept the blade and it kept her. She spoke sometimes to the gods of the north quietly, without ritual, because she had changed the idea of prayer into a kind of remembering. The remembering of a man in a black cell and his last decent act. Sansa's days became as much counting as prayer. She counted how many times Joffrey practiced justice and found the number grew like mold. She counted the stair steps to the place in the wall where you could see past the mud gate to the dark smear of the Blackwater, and wished herself into the smear as if it were a place she could inhabit where names mean less. She counted how often the hound drank enough to tell a story and how often he stopped himself with a word that was a growl. She counted the kinds of kindness that were still possible to her and found that they were mostly listening. To frightened maids, to old men who had been boys long ago, to her own heartbeat as proof that she lived. At Harrenhal, the mountain found a rhythm for killing that made even hard men look at their hands later and wash them again. Tywin left the way great storms leave, slowly but with decisions. Arya left too, and did not call it leaving because she had no word for what it means when your feet begin to move of their own accord toward some place where your name might be given back to you. She ran with 2 boys and a tired, kindly man and a man who could open doors with a coin that had no merchant's worth. They moved like a rumor with legs. The world discovered it had more mouths for her than she had thought. In the Red Keep, Cersei and Tyrion fenced in silk and wine and poison and chain. He told her she had done wrong. She told him she had done necessary. He moved pieces on a board she had thought only she knew the dimensions of. He put men on walls who would hold when they should. He made jokes. He gave orders. He came, sometimes at dawn, into his small rooms and set his head on a table and fell asleep for a quarter hour with his cheek in a pool of his own spittle like a man drunk. Then he woke and went on. Winter put its nose into the wind above Winterfell and smelled a long season. The ravens knew it. The wolves knew it. The men did not, except in the way men always half know what they do not wish to admit. The wall stood. Jon Snow looked into distances and tried to imagine a father's counsel, and found instead the faces of men he would never please and one that he would die to protect. He learned command as a man learns to ride a horse he did not choose by staying on it. The dead moved sometimes where no one agreed they should be able to move. Words like dragonglass found their old meanings. The north always rises differently than the south when stirred. It does not boil, it freezes to a new shape and crushes what is caught between. Ned Stark's bones waited in a box that traveled more carefully than many living men. It would be a long time before they lay beneath a solemn tree and men said the words that make the living believe the dead here. Until then, the north held him as you hold a secret, and the south wore him as you wear a guilt you pretend is a medal. Sansa dreamed of a godswood that did not exist in King's Landing and spoke to leaves that were painted and had never listened to anyone. Arya slept under bushes and in barns and by ditches and spoke to no gods because she believed they had spoken already, and what they had said was that she would have to do for herself. Peter Baelish's absence mattered in ways men had not thought to calculate. There were debts that did not get paid because there was no one to remind one man to forget the note and another to find it. There were letters that did not get written, and so there were betrayals that did not occur, and so there were other betrayals that did, because men's appetites do not cease just because the usual baker closes his shop. The veil hovered in its high air and watched, missing the hand that had brought its sweetmeats in exchange for poison. Lisa's mourning took shapes that made her maester's hands wring themselves. At court, there was one less smile hovering where it should not be and one less whisper behind a curtain. One less, but 100 remained. The city adjusted the way cities do. It found other gutters for its grease, and the river went on going, and the winds found their old paths, and the weathers did as they always do. They taught men that their plans are tents easily torn. The game went on with pieces rearranged not by patience but by accidents that later would be called fate. Some nights, when the city settled and the cats went about their smug, murderous work. You could almost believe the world had paused. It hadn't. In rooms warmed by stolen wood and in halls chilled by too much stone and too little love, men and women lay down and dreamed of crowns and knives and children and the smell of bread. The dreams took shapes in the morning. They always do. Tyrion's horse blew as he crested Aegon's high hill, the animal as unimpressed by history as by the sour wind. The Red Keep sprawled ahead in red stone and arrogance, its towers making a child's crown against a pale sky. The city below was its usual industrious ugliness. Smoke from 10,000 cook fires, fish laid out to dry on rope like flags, the sound of a peddler's cry being answered by another man's derision. The small man felt the old flicker of affection for the place all the same. Cities are lies told out loud. He had spent his life learning to listen for the truth between them. They brought him into the hall with all the ceremony his sister thought proper for a brother she wished had been born elsewhere. Cersei's gown fell like poured metal. She sat in a chair set 3 steps down from the Iron Throne, as if to say she had no interest in usurpation, only in convenience. Joffrey had been made comfortable on the throne itself. He perched with a boy's interest in a dangerous toy. The Iron Throne disliked him as it dislikes all men who mistake it for a chair. Pricked. He had already learned not to wriggle when it did. The lesson had left a line on the back of a pale calf that he wore as a secret. Tyrion bowed as far as vanity permitted. "Sister," he said. "Nephew, you look well."
Doi.
Cersei asked, and the light caught on her smile in a way that made it look jeweled. "The city stinks. That is the smell of your welcome." "I thought that was the smell of ambition," Tyrion said mildly. He took his time peering about, the way short men take time to make tall men bend inadvertently by leaning to hear. "Where is the old cat with the big paws?" "Ah, Varys, you look as if the city agrees with you." "The city agrees with any man who listens when it whispers," Varys said, pink mouth soft. "Welcome, my lord. I have saved a few whispers for you, knowing your fondness for conversation." "And for surviving," Tyrion said under his breath. He let his face grow grave with that theatrical sincerity that had worked for him in places worse than this. "Robert is dead. Ned Stark too. Peter Baelish, I hear, has been dispatched with unusual efficiency." He made a small sorrowing shape with his mouth that fooled no one who knew him. "You have wasted little time." "Time is the only thing we cannot command," Cersei said. "We spend it or it spends us." "Wise," Tyrion said, "and more compelling than anything Pycelle has said in a decade." He glanced at the old man. "But then, light is more compelling than mold." Pycelle fluttered and found a cough where none had been. Joffrey made a noise that wanted to be a laugh and came out a sniff. "We need grain," Cersei said, uninterested in sparring. "We need order. We need the faith to remember God made kings and not the other way around. And we need the boy king to remember men make stories and not the other way around," Tyrion murmured, and then louder. "We need to stop men from climbing the walls when hunger teaches them to be better than they thought. We need to lock certain doors. We need to open others. We need coin." "Ah," Cersei said, and the word contained her contempt for all sums. "Coin. Perhaps you can raise it from air the way you raise jests." "I have raised more serious things from air," Tyrion said blandly. "But coin. There is some in the city that men have hidden from their wives and from their own sense of shame. We can unearth it. There is old wildfire slumbering under cellars. It might be convinced to wake in the right jars at the right time." He smiled because he enjoyed frightening Pycelle. The old man did not disappoint him. "We will have walls that bite back. We will have a chain across the river to turn ships into spiders' food." "A chain," Joffrey repeated. His face had not yet learned how to look thoughtful. It looked only suspicious. "Will you tie the king as well?" "I will tie the river," Tyrion said cheerfully. "The king does not need tying. His will flows in more interesting channels." Cersei rolled her eyes only slightly. "Do what you must," she said. "I do not care for the flavor of these measures. If they work, I will grow used to them." "You sound like a bride," Tyrion said, and she did not smile. "Very well. Let us begin to tidy. That was the word he used in his own mind. Tidy. The work was not tidy. Men never are. He took Pycelle by his beard and shook secrets out of him until the beard trembled more than the secrets. He sent men to the Alchemist's Guild and spoke to Helene the pyromancer with the careful courtesy men extend to a caged tiger. Helene purred and produced jars with pride the way a mother cat parades her kittens. He found craftsmen with hands too honest for their own prosperity, and made them smash and forge and rivet in the belly of the city until the chain grew like a fat iron snake, pretending it had always lived there. He ate little and slept less and told himself he had not come to save this city, but to insult his sister by doing it better than she could. Men lie to themselves for reasons they call strategy. When he did sleep, he dreamed of his father's face under a lantern in a war tent, made of leather and will. He woke hard and dry and laughed into the dark. The laughter did him good. Sansa had not learned to like mornings. They came in with too much clarity and asked that she remember the night exactly, which words had bruised, which hands had helped. On one of those mornings she stood on Maegor's holdfast and watched the river hold its brown course while gulls mispronounced it. The wind found the edge of her cloak and played with it. She held it close and felt smaller for it. She heard boots. She had learned to hear boots, to know the walk of men by the way leather meets stone. The hound's steps were distinctive. Heavy, impatient, unashamed of their weight. "You'll catch your death staring at the water," Sandor Clegane said, stopping a pace away as if that pace kept them both from something worse. His face was what it was. The scar had settled into the landscape of him the way a river settles into its gorge. She had learned to look without flinching. Harshness wears down eyes or strengthens them. Hers had chosen the latter. "It doesn't look like death," she said softly. "I sometimes think it looks like home." "That's because you were raised wrong," he said. It might have been a joke. With him one could not always tell. "You eat." She shook her head. He thrust something at her. A heel of coarse bread. She took it with both hands as if that made the act a small prayer, and bit. It was stale and honest and good. "Thank you." "Don't say that too loud," he said, looking away. "They'll say I'm going soft. I'll have to cut a boy open to keep my name." "You've cut enough boys open," she said before she knew she would. The words surprised her. She felt them leave her mouth and wished for a breath to catch them. She looked at him quick, frightened of his answer. He made a sound deep and unlovely that might have been laughter's ancestor. "More and enough," he said. "One day I'll cut the right one and be satisfied." She did not ask who the right one was. She had learned to shelve curiosity as one shelves a dangerous jug. Out of reach, not out of mind. He stood with her and watched the river, and the quiet between them did not itch. That was a gift in this place. Later that day she would be made to stand in the throne room while Joffrey demonstrated that mercy and malice put on the same face when employed by boys. Later she would say pretty things that sounded like someone else had taught her to say them, and she would hate herself with a hatred that weakened nothing and strengthened nothing and thus was safe. For now there was bread and wind and the smell of the Blackwater that reminded her faintly of the smell of men who have worked and washed and still carry iron on their skins. Arya had a different smell in her nose. Smoke still clung to the inside of her head. When she closed her eyes, she saw the way a timber goes from being a piece of a house to being a weapon against the sky. She had Yoren's voice in her ear even when he was not there anymore. "Keep low, boy. Breathe through your nose. Keep what you have." She had the small hard coin in the pocket she had sewn into her rags. She had 3 names in her throat like stones she meant to spit into men's faces. Harrenhal was all edges and echoes. Men's voices got lost there. The walls wept and the water stank and the hot places did not warm anything one wished warmed. They set her to carrying and scrubbing and doing the things that teach children they are objects. She learned the names of men who had made themselves into sharpness to survive here. Whis with his flail and his breath of rot. The tickler with his patient malice and his habit of asking questions whose answers were already tied to a rope. She learned to move when they looked at other things and to be still when their eyes found her without interest. She saw Tywin Lannister once up close. So close she could see a hair growing at an angle under the skin of his jaw where his barber had missed it. His stillness was a weapon. She hated him without a story to attach to it. It was a clean hatred, which is rare. The man in the half-iron cage kept his eyes on her with a courtesy that did not match his circumstances. Jachin Hagar spoke softly, as if speaking loudly might cause offense to a god. When he told her she could have 3 deaths because she had saved 3 from fire, she had felt the words settle into the world like a weight. It was a magic men like Sirio would laugh at, and yet it had the smell of the same truth. The trick of names. The first, she said to him between the passing of one bucket and the next, is the tickler. He inclined his head as if she had told him good morning. The tickler was found with his mouth full of flies by noon, fear still writ tidy on his face. Men said he had taken fever. Men lied to themselves the way Arya had learned to lie, cleanly to survive the day. Amory Lorch came to Harrenhal with news wrapped up in himself like a bad gift. He brought orders, arrogance, and the smell of dog. He brought danger for Arya and the few she was learning to think of as hers. She ran to Jachin and said the second name as if throwing a knife. The man made a face like a thought. Lorch choked in the stable that afternoon with a string wrapped in his own hand. The stable boy swore he had seen no one. The gods saw. Arya tried not to smile while she scrubbed a floor on her knees and learned how a smile can be hidden in the back of your throat and tasted there for later strength. She saved the third name for when men she trusted would have died without it. She said Jachin's own name and watched his eyes receive it like a gift wrapped too tightly. He bent then, not in anger but as a reed bends because it has been taught to do so by wind. He made her a promise. He made her a road. He made her a door through the dark heart of a bad place. And she went through with 2 boys and a quiet brown man whose kindness had grown the shape of a habit. She walked away from Harrenhal and did not look back because Sirio had told her once that looking back is for men who think there is someone coming to save them. In the Riverlands, Robb's victories sat on tables like fresh meat. Men cut slices from them and grew fat with confidence. Then they counted their empty barrels and stopped smiling. War is appetite. Robb learned to starve parts of himself to feed the whole. He sent Theon Greyjoy east with a letter and hope because Theon had stood beside him in boyhood, and because the sea that had made the Greyjoys had not yet washed that companionship entirely away. The words in that letter asked Balon Greyjoy to be a father to his son and a bannerman to his chosen king. The sea does not love a supplicant. Theon breathed salt in the old way as the smoking rocks of Pike took shape. He thought of the phrase the sea makes its own men and wanted to be done with phrases. He stood before his father and found a lean man made of old rope and grievance. Balon called him a squid in silk and laughed at the north. Aaron Damphair muttered prayers that wished to drown him and bring him up rewoven. Asha, who was not to be called Asha in men's company, clapped him on the shoulder with the same angle and pressure she would give to the haft of an axe. He burned under it and loved her for her refusal to allow him to be pretty. When the Kraken banners went up, they did not go to Robb. They went to the coasts that smelled like prey. Theon sent no letter to explain that he had been washed clean of his last loyalties. Men are not given that courtesy. He rode for the green and brown hall that had once been soft with furs and meat and his boyhood laughter. He rode for Winterfell. Bran had learned how to be still. The lesson had come with a fall and a bed and pain, and then without pain, which was worse. Pain tells you where you end. Osha's patience and Maester Luwin's sad knowledge had made him a little lord that men in leather looked to instinctively. He took counsel from boys and wolves the way other lords take counsel from men with scrolls. He told himself this was not playing. This was being. When the horns sounded on a day that had been like other days, grain counts, letters, the feel of wind through tower windows, he wanted to sit up and could not. Theon's smile came into the great hall as if it had been left there in a chest years ago and had soured. Winterfell fell not because it was weak but because no one had expected this boy to come with men who killed men in their sleep. The men of the Iron Islands had learned to climb a boarding net in storms. Walls were a different sort of ship. They took the keep with the harsh efficiency of men who prefer their victories brutal and short. Theon sat in the high seat with the awkwardness of an actor wearing someone else's face. He called it ruling because he had never had another word for it. He held Bran like a piece on a game board and moved him here and there to make the men he had grown up with open their mouths around new names. He wanted to be obeyed. It is a common enough desire. It eats men differently. Boys ran in the dark. Osha took them with a mind for paths no one else had the habit to see. Hodder carried. Rickon did not understand why things that had been as permanent as the taste of bread had come to an end. He did not need to. They escaped. Theon hunted for them and brought back 2 charred bodies he swore were theirs. Men who had once cuffed his ear as a joke looked at him with a disgust he could not bear. He told himself the falsehood was necessary to keep the yard quiet. He told himself many things. He slept poorly in a great bed. Catelyn had the news in her hands and kept her face. She had become skilled at this. Reading grief and then putting it into a pocket to be touched later, in a room where her sons could not see her do it. She rode to speak to her son the king and found him speaking to a girl in chain. Brienne of Tarth stood with her great hands and her greater sincerity, and Catelyn loved her a little immediately because sincerity is rare and ugly in public and yet always beautiful in rooms where truth is spoken without witnesses. She asked Brienne to swear and the girl swore a good oath, the kind that does not crack in the cold. Jaime Lannister's bonds chafed him like a philosophy. He joked to hide the places where shame had settled in his ribs like trapped birds. Catelyn came to him because choices are made by mothers that other men call treachery. She untied him because she had daughters in a city with a boy who was becoming himself too quickly. "You will keep your word," she told him. He rolled the word around his mouth as if it had an iron taste. "I will keep the word that keeps me alive," he said. She sent him with a tall girl who had made herself into a blade for love. She was shocked to find the world contained such love. She prayed it would be enough. Dragonstone hummed. Stannis wore his frown like a visor. He took counsel from a woman whose eyes had swallowed a forge. He gave himself to a god the way a man gives himself to a diet, grudgingly at first, then hungrily when he discovers how much he enjoys depriving himself. He wrote letters that bled and called them remedy. He rode to meet a brother who had made his own kingdom out of beauty and banners and the smiles of tycoons. The tent in which he found Renly smelled of leather and roses and a certain arrogance. When he left it, Renly's armor stood in the dawn as if waiting for a ghost to come put it on. The wind took the red silk of a standard and made mock of it. They said murder. They said dark miracle. Men said shadow and flinched as if the word had crept close enough to touch them. Without Peter Baelish running between beds with promises, the Reach's choice seemed simpler. Mace Tyrell loved his good dinners and his good victories, never mind in which order. He hated being on the side that lost. Loras loved his dead king and needed someone to hurt. Olenna measured how many lives a marriage could save and how many a siege would cost and decided it was time for better bread. It did not need a little finger to point out where the kitchen lay. Varys carried delicate phrases up the mander and down again. Tyrion sent a letter made of silk and iron both. Tywin wrote one line that said he would love to dine with the Reach and sign whatever napkin they chose to hand him. They came. Joffrey, told that he would set aside Sansa for Marjorie, discovered a new appetite, casting aside things before he had finished breaking them. He consented because he was told it would give him a prettier toy and more bread. Sansa stood straight and learned what grace meant when you have nothing to lose but your posture. She kissed Marjorie's cheek the way a girl does when she has learned how to pretend that the other girl is a friend and not the name of her reprieve. Marjorie kissed her back with the practiced sweetness of a kindness that had been taught early and reinforced by careful women. There was something honest in it too, because honesty has a way of surviving instruction in certain hearts. Tyrion walked the walls at dusk and had conversations with stones, the way men do when they are about to ask them to bear more than they were built for. He watched barges across the river and counted. He watched the pyromancers at their work and counted. He counted men and jars and arrows and oaths. He kept a tally of lies he had told his sister and lies he had told men he intended to save, and noted how the sums surprised him. He sent Myrcella away and did not watch the ship beyond the second reach of the harbor for fear that he would mention feelings to himself and then have to argue with them. He went sometimes to Shay and put his head in her lap and made a joke of it, and she laughed because he made it easy to. He enjoyed the ease and did not trust it. He dreamed once of a cavern under a city where a coin clinked on a table and a girl's voice said Vala Morgue, Hoolies, and woke hard and bewildered, annoyed at having been given a prophecy he could not spend. The men in the street of steel put their fingers on good iron and told it what to be and did not care about kings, beyond whether they paid. Gendry worked among them with a quiet that made other apprentices leave him alone. He had kept moving after the chaos at the holdfast, after Yoren's last curse, after men with bad teeth and worse flags had dragged some of the boys away and told them new names. He had found himself in a different forge than Tobo's, making common tools for common men who needed to keep their families from being clubbed for stale bread. He heard the rumor that the hand looked after bastards and had no use for it. He had learned to look after himself with the old weapon his mother had put into his hands, the habit of work. Arya moved through woods the way smoke moves through rafters. Gendry crossed her path and looked down at a boy with a stubborn chin. He had seen that chin somewhere. He kept his questions. Men who have learned to live by not asking keep that lesson when it costs them no pride. They fell in with a company, then out, then with another as men fall in with storms and come out of them. She learned to eat salt pork and be grateful. She learned that she could not wear grief openly around boys without receiving jokes for it. She learned to wear a blade openly instead and got respect. She had Jaqen's coin. She touched it when fear rose up and bit her. She told herself the man had been a part of a story that the world had decided not to end her in that place. Not yet. Robb sent Theon into the east and Theon sent regret back by crows that he then killed. Winterfell fell. Bran and Rickon hid and ran and hid again with wolves who had learned their faces and their scents and the nuance of their fear. The miller's boys burned and gave their parents grief over corpses that bore the wrong names. Theon's men sniggered and did his orders with the easy obedience of men who enjoy cruelty and mince their fear into contempt. Theon stood at the walls at night and spoke to the sea he could not hear, and told it the north was a colder water and he would master it. And the sea said nothing because it was far away. Osha kept her knife where it would find neck when the right moment came. She had patience that did not feel like waiting to her because patience on the run is work. Catelyn stood over an ill father and a wounded brother and a boy king and kept her hands moving. Linen, letters, knives, bread. The small daily work that gives the large thoughts time to settle into things. The word vengeance came at her from men's mouths like a piece of meat, and she sent it on its way because vengeance is a dish late served when the table has been cleared of every necessary plate. She put Jaime Lannister on a road because the room had allowed no other exits that did not lead to her daughter's deaths. She knew what men would call it. So they do, she told the knight. So they always do. At King's Landing, the smell of tar took up lodging with the smell of piss. Men learned that the river could wear a chain like a whore wears a necklace and that the chain would have a different meaning, one more fitted to the city's true appetites. Tyrion walked the length of that chain the night before the first lanterns were spotted downriver. He touched links and told himself he believed in the metal more than in prayers and a little less than in cunning. He sent letters to every man who could be counted on to stand when the first push came. He talked to Bronn until they laughed at their own mockeries, then grew sober because they had tasted true fear under them. He put on a helm that did not fit his pride and told himself to be brave like a story. He did not believe his own stories, but he knew their utility. Stannis's ships came up the Blackwater like teeth. The men on them had been starved of love all their lives and had fed themselves on rules. Rules have their own taste in the mouth. Melisandre was not upon them. Her work was elsewhere. Stannis's face on the prow looked carved, and the wind did not trouble it. The men on the walls made the sounds men always make when ships come. The sound of archaic fear dressed in modern armor. The wildfire burned pretty. It always does. The first green blossom opened on the water between Stannis's first flight and his second, and the river inhaled and the city shrieked the way a crowd shrieks at the first act of a mummer's show. Then the heat reached them and their skin remembered they were living. The sound became something like prayer in truth. Jars broke. Ships broke. Men unlearned all their careful training and learned fire, which is older. Tyrion's voice rose and filled the spaces it had to. He could command when it was necessary, and men will follow any voice that promises to spread fear a little thinner among them. He rode with a spear in his hand that he meant to point only where Bronn told him. Cersei drank wine in Maegor's holdfast and told women old stories about queens who poisoned themselves and their children rather than see them taken. She held a small vial the way a woman holds a jewel. Sansa sat among them and resembled calm because it was the only form of resistance left to her. Shae found a way to be with her, and that was the night Sansa discovered that a whore is a woman first and that the names men spit at them are a kind of shield some take up because all the others have been knocked away. Joffrey played at being Hannibal and then discovered that bridges of men fall just like bridges of rope when enough weight is put on them. He learned that the taste of courage leaves a bitter scum when fear is poured onto it too quickly. He gagged on it and retreated when his mother's messenger told him to go to her. He did not enjoy obeying. The hound refused to go back out on the river's edge when the sky turned hell's color. He said, "Fuck the king," and men heard something they had been waiting all their lives to be told by a man with a scar. He looked at Sansa with disgust and something else that had begun to respect the girl who took instruction without complaint. He offered her a way out, drunk and dangerous and odd. She refused with a grace she had not expected to find in herself, and he told her she was stupid for refusing, and she did not mind the insult as much as she had thought she might. The chain rose when it was told to, as if a beast had been waiting for its chance to show what it had learned. Stannis' ships found their oars impeded and their hulls pushed against one another with all the mindless cruelty of a crowded market. Fires ran from jar to jar like gossip in a September Tyrion pushed where the battle was fat with men and found his small weight mattered once and then again. He bled. He continued. He came back into himself with a new scar that made another story for his enemies to tell. Ser Mandon Moore had tried to kill him with the precise disinterest of a man who likes knives more than the men he is introduced to using them upon. Podrick Payne had interrupted the performance by being young and brave where no one had asked him to be. Tyrion woke with the taste of blood and the feel of a boy's trembling hands that had once been steady enough to bring him a pen without spilling ink. Tywin came in like a book the city had decided to publish at the last possible moment. Black horse, banners at the right angles, lines of men with faces that had been trained to get narrower when danger widens. The Tyrells came with him in green and gold, and Loras wore a face that had learned how to be a blade in mourning. They cut and the cut held. Stannis' men learned that the walls of a city do not yield to right only. They yield to numbers and cruelty and luck, and the city had finally bought enough of all three. The ships burned down to their ribs and then those ribs collapsed and the river resumed being a brown patient thing with dead men in it. In the morning, Cersei put on a smile that said this had all been a lesson designed to teach her the names of her friends. She had Joffrey bestow a name upon his grandfather and a necklace upon Marjorie and a mercy upon Sansa. Mercy defined as neglect. He put aside Sansa with a sentence that sounded like a line from a play. Sansa bowed and found inside herself a hard, clear place a Septa would have called blasphemy if Sansa had tried to describe it. She returned to her rooms and found the hound had gone, that his stink did not fill a corner the way it sometimes did. She sat on the bed and put her hands in her lap and felt she had become older in one night than a girl should. She did not cry. There was nothing to water that would grow mercy now. Tyrion lay in a dark place that smelled of vinegar and old linen and heard men outside reciting heroics that did not mention him. He laughed and then did not because laughing cost breath and he was not a fool. He turned his head and found Varys sitting with a candle cupped in his hands like an illicit pleasure. "My lord," the eunuch said, "you have saved a city." "Did I?" Tyrion rasped. "I was sure I had saved my sister from having to marry the sea." Varys smiled with a soft ferocity. "The city has short memories," he murmured. "We must cultivate longer ones for it." "Plant my name like a weed," Tyrion said and slept. Robb's war did not pause for other men's sieges. He came too late to Winterfell to do anything but measure the ashes and the insult. Theon's choices made a new shape of grief. Men found him later where men always find men who have run out of their own lies and other men's patience. He wore shame and pride as if they had been baked together in him and would not separate. The wolves did not judge. They did not forgive either. That was men's work. Jaime Lannister walked road and river both beside a woman who held her honor like a sword she did not intend to draw without necessity. He learned to be hungry and to sleep with fugitive things chewing at the edges of his thought. He learned that jokes do not comfort hungry men as much as bread does. He began, reluctantly, to enjoy the company he had mocked. She did not laugh when he told her how he had killed a king. She did not hate him properly either. She did not have time. She was too busy watching the road and counting risks and protecting a promise. He tugged at her patience and at her mind, and she did not pull away. Later, when things would be named with cruelty and pity both, neither of them would be entirely surprised to find they had learned to speak a common language under the sky. Arya reached a road that split and picked the one that did not point to any place she recognized. She made herself small and then, when that did not work, made herself hard. She met men in a burned village who had once been called by names and now were called by hunger. She met a woman who baked black bread and saw the little blade at Arya's back and did not betray her because the woman's daughter had worn such a blade once and it had not saved her. Pity kept her tongue, and that night Arya dreamed of her father with no sword and woke with her hand on the little hilt the way a child wakes with a hand on a doll's hair. Sansa learned the names of women in the court who spoke little and offered meat and sewing needles and stories about how to keep one's sanity when there are too many reasonable men in a room. She found herself in a garden with a woman whose laughter was a gardener's tool, Olenna Redwine, who pruned people with questions and jokes and set her granddaughter where she wanted her planted. The old woman looked at Sansa's face as if reading a ledger. "Pretty," she said, "and too honest. We will fix the second so that the first does not go to waste." Sansa did not know whether to be frightened or grateful. She practiced telling the truth only in ways that hurt no one. Herbs bent under her fingers and let go of their scent. Tyrion found himself removed from the rooms where decisions are made and put into rooms where decisions are explained. Tywin sat the council table and made it into a field of war. Cersei glowed again with power borrowed from victories she had not purchased. Joffrey strutted and looked toward the door whenever Marjorie entered and rearranged his mouth into a new cruelty to impress her that he mistook for wit. The small man learned to sit back in his chair and appear to have shrunk. Varys watched. He always had an air of having put some small thing in the room that would explode later if men did not mind their manners. Tyrion never discovered the thing. He enjoyed trying. In the swamps, the crannogmen moved in without alarm. They had the patience of men born in slow water. They took out men in iron by degrees and told no one. The tale of the North's war shifted by inches the way a reed bed shifts in wind. Robb chose another road because the one he had promised to walk had been cut in front of him and behind. He fell in love because men do in war, because wounds make their own medicines and love is the oldest, because he was young enough to believe vows can be remade without cost. Catelyn felt the rope pull in one direction when she had expected it in another and told herself that mothers who meddle have killed sons in better stories than hers. She still meddled. The story pays everyone. It is not just. Jon Snow climbed. The wall accepted him as it accepts all stubborn men, with a slow training in humility. He learned to step carefully where other men had fallen and left their lesson in the ice. He learned the names of the wind and the stories of trees that live in a place where trees should not. He went into the far side of the world with Corn Halfhand and learned to be a different kind of liar than men are in the South. He learned to lie the way wolves do by wearing a skin. He met a girl with hair redder than sense and a mouth older than his. He let her live, and then he learned how to follow a man to death because the world was going to need one man alive to carry a story back. He did what he was told and then did what he had sworn to do and found, to his surprise, that sometimes they are the same. Daenerys Targaryen walked under hot suns and taught herself a queen's patience. Qarth welcomed her and then learned it had welcomed a hunger it could not feed. She learned to bargain with men who wore words like jewelry. She learned that dragons grow the way children do, suddenly in the night with consequences in the morning. She found a house that promised to give her what she wanted most in exchange for small civilities and discovered, as clever girls do, that most traps smell of spice and paint. She burned what needed burning and left a city behind that would tell stories about her long after it had been forgotten by those who matter. She took a ship that did not deserve her and learned that she would have to build men as surely as she would build fleets. In King's Landing, the mummers rehearsed a new play about a little man who had tricked the sea and a boy king whose arrows had set the water itself to shrieking. It sold good bread and bad ideas. Sansa watched it from a palace window she had learned to stand behind without being seen and told herself a different version that did not find an audience. She began, cautiously, to plan her leaving with whispers that fell into ears that would not repeat them. She learned that whispers are themselves chains and made herself ready to run when the links snapped in the right order. Arya said the list of names under her breath every night, and in the list's rhythm there was comfort, the way men who work with hammers find comfort in a steady beat. She learned a new name and added it, Dunsin, Raff the Sweetling, and told herself that names are power even when you have no army. She put the coin under her tongue sometimes to feel its weight. She promised herself she would give it to the right man when the day came for crossing a sea. The North hungered for snow and the South hungered for certainty. Men moved banners along roads that had never asked for such decoration. The game made a new sound because one player had been removed early. Peter Baelish's death had been, at the time, a clean solution to a dirty problem. Now it was an absence that altered echoes. Cersei found that certain favors went undelivered because no one had delivered them for anyone but themselves. Varys found his webs catching different flies with less strain. Tyrion discovered he had one less competitor in the sport of mischief and missed him only because worthy opponents make men's knives sharper. In a dark room in Harrenhal, a man took a candle and made of its flame a small lesson for himself. The light is a liar. It tells you the world is as big as it can reach. Then he snuffed it and told himself the truth. The dark is honest. It tells you nothing. He had been called many things. He was called nothing by a girl with a wolf's eyes. He set out for a sea that had been promised to him by a coin. The world, which loves to have its debts paid in interesting ways, smiled its thin smile, and the river went on going. It is what rivers do when men build chains across them to make them obey. The chain had done its work. The men who had raised it told themselves they had taught a river a lesson. The river did not argue. It carried fire and dead men and a little boat with a fisherman who had not asked for a war. It forgot them all in order, because forgetting is a river's wisdom. The city learned different lessons and remembered them just long enough to misunderstand them. The North did not ask lessons of anyone. It waited the way deep weather waits, and when it moved next it would be with that terrible courtesy winter shows. No haste, no malice, no apologe. In the God's Wood of Winterfell, the face on the pale heart tree looked surprised as always. A boy who was sometimes more than a boy sat beneath it and dreamed not of swords but of flying. Wolves passed through the shadow of its branches and did not pause, because trees do not need wolves' prayers. In King's Landing, a rose opened on a hedge where no one had planted it and a queen-to-be smiled without being told to. The Iron Throne waited indulgently for the next man who believed he could sit on it without being cut. Men stitched banners while women stitched wounds. The crows walked clever on walls. A red woman watched a flame and said nothing because the flame was saying everything to her. And she, unlike most, had learned to be silent when flame speaks. And far to the east, 3 shadows grew and cast their shapes on the walls of a tent made of new ambition and old hunger. A woman stood in the mouth of that tent and looked at the horizon as if it were a thing she could call by name. She had learned that names make doors. She had learned that some doors open in both directions, and some, once opened, will not close again until enough blood has been spilled beneath them to pretend it hinges. She took a breath. The world went on taking its own. The story had not yet chosen where to turn next. That was the hope in it. That was the fear. Tyrion limped through a courtyard that had been swept 3 times and still held a smell of men who had slept there and bled there and boasted there and died there. He thought of a woman with hair the color of new hay who had given him a kind look once in a place no man would call pretty, and he told himself not to think. He thought anyway. He went to the council chamber and listened as his father made war out of sentences, aligning vowels and spears with equal care. He interrupted once, gently, and his father did not look at him. The small man smiled because he had taught himself to take pleasure in the wrong things, and he was not yet inclined to stop. San. Essay lifted her needle and let the thread glide. She put a rose on cloth and made it better than real because cloth can be taught where to grow. She decided one thing and then another and then another. She did not tell anyone. Arya watched a road and decided when to leave it. Robb laid his plans out on a map that had too much water on it to be trusted and decided which of his lies he could afford to make into truths. Theon looked at a wall in the night and decided not to climb it. Stannis looked at a sword on a table and decided to call it Lightbringer because names have power when men agree to be wrong together. Jon Snow looked at a line in the snow where no boot had made it and decided to lie down on that line and see whether it led to truth. Dany looked at a deck where the sun drew lines in ropes and decided to be steel. The river went on going. It will. It must. Men build and burn and drown and sing. Rivers ignore them. But if you look very closely at a bend in water when the light is just so, you can almost imagine you see men's faces in it. They are the faces of men who think themselves clever who are surprised by the turn, and the faces of men who do not think themselves clever who are not surprised. Then the light shifts again, and the river is what it is, and you are left with your own face reflected back, which is the only one you can do anything about until the world tells you otherwise. Night came as it insists. The city's lights pricked the dark like an illness that sometimes looks pretty from a hill. Far beyond those lights, wolves sang as if they had a right to the song, which of course they did. The sea made its old argument at every shore at once, and some shores agreed and some did not. In the quiet where men have exhausted even their worst intentions for the day, the world recalculated its sums. A tree in a cold place remembered a man's breath. A coin in a girl's pocket remembered a promise. A knife in a kitchen remembered a neck. A throne remembered all the reasons it had for cutting. The rest, the details, the meetings, the letters, the long rides over bad roads would come. For now, the tale held itself at the top of a slope and looked down and did not move, out of respect for the men and women who were going to have to run it in the morning.